I see the growth of AI as huge going forward, and I think it's because the government is incredibly data rich, and AI really provides us the ability to start evaluating and understanding that data and leveraging it as a strategic asset.
There is no denial that AI is playing a role in our everyday lives, and it's growing. As a matter of fact, I would consider the prevalence and proliferation of AI, whether it be artificial intelligence as you know it, or more robotics, automation, or RPA, it becomes part of our fabric.
The connectivity of data, or the accessibility of it, is becoming easier. The challenging part is when you start having this large volumes of data coming in from all directions, is really trying to narrow it down to the most valuable components of that data and how they align to challenges or problems.
AI and RPA, finding ways to incorporate technology and streamline our processes, things where we can remove some of our human interactions, is something that's right on the forefront as we go into a digital framework across the DoD. We change just like the industry does.
The technology is not the challenge, is the culture. I think in order to fix an issue, or fix a problem, you have to admit that you have a problem before you can fix it. So I think we have to come to our senses and say, hey, we have issues with pushing paper around.
I think by working together, we can really make a big difference for our veterans by leveraging AI around special veteran and other priority areas.
We have a long ways to go. We need to make sure that the resources in the federal government are there. We can't let ourselves fall behind on this one. This is too important.
Good morning. Welcome to our virtual event, AI Gov. This event kicks off a series we'll have throughout the year and beyond, featuring discussions on the ever-changing landscape of artificial intelligence in government. Today, we have a great lineup for you with leaders all around government discussing the common issues and opportunities agencies are facing today with the emerging technology. I'd like to thank our event sponsor, Fortinet, for helping make this event happen, and thank you all for spending your day with us. As always, we will try to get to audience questions in each segment, so submit them in the field below this video. We're going to kick off the program with a high-level look at AI and public policy and congressional priorities, and how AI can really benefit the American public. That is going to feature Chairwoman Haley Stevens of the House Subcommittee on Research and Technology. She is joined by our President, Mike Hoffman. Mike, on to you.
All right, thank you very much, Amy, and thank you very much. We're really excited to have Congresswoman Stevens join us, and as any busy Congresswoman, she's got some votes on the floor. So we're going to I'm going to do a quick intro, and then we're going to jump into questions to take advantage of as much time as possible with her. So a quick introduction. She represents Michigan's 11th district and was elected into the House in 2018. Like Amy was saying, she is not only the chairwoman of the Research and Technology Subcommittee, but also the co-chair of the Future of Work Task Force. Before she came into Congress, she worked with the Obama administration as the chief of staff to the U.S. Auto Rescue Task Force, where she helped save over 200,000 Michigan jobs. So welcome, Congresswoman Stevens. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Hey, I am so delighted to be with you, Michael. And I got to say, you've got a remarkable background and are helping to lead just a really tremendous organization in such a critical time for the issues we're about to discuss here today. So I really, really appreciate that you took the time to reach out to me to invite me in. I just got notice. We are in the middle of a vote series, but we're going to have the time to have our full discussion. And I am so glad because this is an important one. So thank you to you and the whole group.
Well, fantastic. And Chairwoman, one of the reasons we wanted to reach out to you and be a part of this morning's event is because of all the great work that you're doing within workforce, and especially in the investments within research and development. So I wanted to start there on the R&D space. One of the biggest things, especially when it comes to AI technologies with government agencies, is investing in the infrastructure and the basic technologies to take advantage of these more advanced AI opportunities. So I was wondering, from your perspective, what are some of those investments that are going on what are some of the most important investments that are going on right now for some of those agencies? And where is the government in that space?
Yeah, well, let's start with looking outside of the full purview of the committee that I have a sincere privilege of serving on, which is the Science, Space, and Technology Committee that has direct oversight of NIST, the National Science Foundation, oversight of the Department of Energy, as well as a dotted line over to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, which is also a real privilege. And take a look at what I think you're getting at here, which is really the big question of our time, which is what is our all of government approach in terms of investing in R&D spends, and in particular with regard to the transformations in technology that are so essential to our competitiveness, not just economically, but also in terms of national security. And I always love when I have a subcommittee hearing and my friends from the Department of Defense just come, I can't bring them in because I don't have oversight of them, but they come to listen in. And you see a lot of this cross-functionality with Manufacturing USA, which began as the National Network for Manufacturing Innovation. This was an effort to use the flexible budget spends out of Department of Defense and Department of Energy to create a suite of research innovation institutes specific to the R&D needs of our industrial sector. So you see we've got 3D printing, photonics, digital manufacturing, flexible electronics, battery technology, and on. And these are true public-private partnerships. And you know this better than most, Michael, that we don't want to be siloed in terms of our approach. And so in particular in terms of the government and the exercising of government, so you see these institutes not just being DOD exclusively and DOE exclusively, but also bringing in the Department of Commerce with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, along with some of our other critical research agencies like the National Science Foundation. One of the exciting things that took place as these institutes were getting off the ground, and they've now been in place for a little bit longer than a hot minute, right? So we'll be getting to the 10-year mark sooner rather than later. And one of the exciting things that took place was you started seeing the National Institute of Standards and Technology signing an MOU with the Department of Defense for cybersecurity and cybersecurity technology applications. Now, that might not seem like a big deal to those outside of today's audience, but I know all of you know how difficult it is to bring together agencies like that in a collaborative space, particularly as it's doing what? Back-ending the R&D work that's taking place in the digital space with artificial intelligence and on. So, we've got a healthy spend of R&D. Certainly as a nation, we're always benchmarking, where we are as compared to our foreign competitors. Look, we can look at that as it pertains to China, and certainly they have a different private sector to component here. I think we know we need to do more, certainly as a nation, and also look at the research areas as well. And that's something that I'm driving every single day on the Science Committee.
Well, that's an interesting point that you bring up in terms of cybersecurity and protecting those investments. Could you go a little bit deeper into that in terms of what are some of those cybersecurity concerns that might come forward when it has to do with the R&D for very sensitive topics like AI technologies?
Yeah, that is such a question of the day for our industry partners as well as our suppliers, and in particular it's tricky because, and I've seen this before I got to Congress, right, Michael? I was working in the R&D space, and we get to a place where we're ready for that technology adoption or technology transfer. And then all of a sudden you start asking yourself the question, though, of are we going to have the cybersecurity necessary to ensure that we're not going to have foreign interference or disruption or espionage? Certainly, there's even the corporate espionage component that comes up with things as well. And look, this is why we need to have, and we've been working towards certifications with our suppliers in particular, and extra resources and support. The Michigan Manufacturing Technology Center, which is located in my district in southeastern Michigan. It is our NIST MEP center. It's headquartered in my district, I should say. They've got about 5 locations around the state. And they really began to do the leadership and the work with our suppliers early on to start qualifying them with their OE. Now, that said, we also have restrictions in place, and we can't just have a free-for-all, and particularly when it is involving our government agencies, and particularly the Department of Defense. So I know that there's restrictions in terms of applications and where things get developed, and this is tricky in a flat world where, you know, the internet is the great uniter and makes the world seem really flat. Well, we've also absolutely, not to the stymie of our innovation or economic opportunity, but really for the protection of our national security. And so you will see things in some ways rightly placed within different segments of the Department of Defense, you know, with our various agencies or military divisions where, you know what, this one's going to be for Navy, and Navy's working on it, and we're going to be really protective of what goes over into another branch of our military for those exact reasons. We also see this in terms of procurement as well. I will lastly say, because I know we could do all day on this, and I'm only going in the weeds because I know you guys can all do it. But I'll just lastly say that, you know, human capital is absolutely essential for us. And we have really got to make sure that we have got a protected human capital base that is qualified to be of assistance with cybersecurity needs and the maintenance and the setup for, if we're talking about government agencies or if we're talking about in the private sector. And I think we also have to have that vet, particularly with individuals who are coming in from overseas and, you know, might not have the best intentions and purposes. I know one of the supercomputer centers down in Florida just had to, you know, they just sought to arraign a researcher who'd been with them for 9 years, but it's because they were sending things back home to China, you know, and we want harmony and we want a peaceful world, but we also have to understand that not all the global actors have our best interests in mind, and they are seeking to take advantage and disrupt our systems for their own gain, and we have to take that seriously.
Absolutely. Well, that gives us a good segue into one of your other major initiatives is really developing that workforce, developing the training, so folks can really take advantage of these new technologies. What are some of the programs that you're most excited about that deals with STEM, as well as retraining folks to get them ready for these new technologies and take advantage of the boom within the manufacturing world?
Well, let me start with one that doesn't have a ton of federal resources attached to it, and it's FIRST Robotics. And I say that as a Michigander because we have the most number of FIRST Robotics teams in the country. But I'll just tell you, Michael, I've seen the magic of this program firsthand, where we've got, you know, our legions of high schools who have FIRST Robotics teams. Obviously, a lot of disruption in the last year because of COVID-19, different roles for all the team members. Some are doing, I mean, it's amazing to watch them. Some of them are doing data analytics, some are doing negotiation and diplomacy, some are obviously building the robot and doing the testing and, you know, making sure they're in the pitch perfect place for the competition. Detroit, Michigan has hosted the world's competition over the last handful of years. We've had a lot of private sector support, and that's how this is successful, right? It's not just the high schools standing this up and running blind. It's the high schools in partnership with our local manufacturers who are providing coaching and team support. Michael, they're plucking these students right out of the teams into apprenticeship programs. and into pathways for, engineering or other, computer numerical controls training and things along those lines. So that one, FIRST Robotics is really, really one to watch out for and look out for rather, because it's enormous, it's very impactful, and frankly, I want to see everyone get involved. We know in the federal government we're doing a lot of spends through the Department of Labor, the National Science Foundation. At the end of 2019, I had the president sign the bill that I did with Dr. Jim Baird, my former ranking member on the subcommittee for research and technology. It's called the Building Blocks of STEM Act, asking the National Science Foundation to prioritize that early childhood education. I know for all of us so eager in that pipeline, well, we know we got to start early too. And we want to put an emphasis on young girls and show them that they can have a path for a STEM career. And then we also want to look and study some of these gender gaps that we see. And it's not just that we're going to do early childhood at the expense of existing workforce training. And so our centers, I know in Michigan, what's funded through the Department of Labor with Michigan Works and the retraining efforts are really enormous. Our community colleges, God bless them, they play such a critical role. And then I can't conclude this without just giving a shout out to the National Association of Manufacturers, who's really, really been a leader. And that comes down to Manufacturing Day and what we're doing with Manufacturing Day. It's an annual event. They're bringing in students firsthand, showing them what it's like to have a career in manufacturing, and you just see, their eyes start to sparkle and thinking, oh my gosh, I can do this. And then that's another career pathway for folks. Now, we all know we're in a total demand for the talent, for the technology talent, needing obviously the technical skills that it takes to run machines. And we've got a lot of resources in place. This is, one of the big focus areas of mine and a lot of my colleagues in the Congress. So know we got the support coming.
Okay. Well, now that we're coming into a new administration, what are some of your priorities for the subcommittee in some of those investments within research and technology? I know there's a lot of people itching for all different investments in different technologies, whether it be AI and machine learning. But from where you sit as the chairwoman, what are some of your priorities within these next few years?
Yeah, I know it's hard not to want to boil the ocean, just with this little subcommittee of mine. I was actually just having this conversation with a few of my colleagues, and I'll tell you from last term, it really felt like sky's the limit in terms of doing the big thinking around. Here we were at the beginning of last term, 2019, hitting the 50-year anniversary of the moon landing, and reflecting on, well, what's our moonshot of the next 50 years, right? Let's think in those terms, right? And obviously our subcommittee is going to direct the full thing. Now, I come from Michigan, and what I see all around me is fantastic innovation taking place in the electric vehicle space, along with autonomous vehicles. We are at a truly transformative moment when it comes to the R&D needs of industry and the application of that R&D. Now, we don't want to just stop there, because industry over the last 20 to 25 years has really been impacted, obviously, by this digital space, right? I mean, you can go into a company and start seeing how they've adopted digital mechanisms from the start of this millennium to now and trained their workforce. And then we start to see the R&D needs in the machine learning space, right? Where you guys are, where we're hanging out today, the data analytics space, quantum, a lot of opportunity with quantum, particularly in the efficiency space. But also, when we start thinking about, and let's tie this back to to cybersecurity for a minute, with our privacy enhancing technologies. We've got now, you get in your automobile, and here I am talking about electric and autonomous. But what about just all the lines of code running through your car? What about the $1 billion of R&D that goes into every car now? I mean, it's just, your car doesn't cost $1 billion, but it's, it's this whole mechanism through complex supply chains that's breathing into our regional economies and to you as a consumer. But you're in that vehicle, and all of a sudden your car can output, exactly where you're driving, where you're going, all that data collection. And there's some friction in industry as it pertains to the data collection, but there's a lack of awareness for the consumer about what's happening with their personal data. And so what we are trying to do is invest in the new technologies that would protect the privacy of the consumer, right? And so that folks, anonymously, right? So folks can still capture the data, but you're anonymous in the process. And I think, and this is a place I really am eager, to lean in with all of you, which is when we start looking at these major opportunities in, artificial intelligence, in machine learning, in the digital space, and the demands that we have for the R&D, we also don't want to skip over some of the other work that we need to do to, one, look at technology adoption. Sometimes we all get worried about the valley of death and these, we got the university and entrepreneurial partnerships, but we also want to look at proliferation, economic development, and job creation. And one of the things, if we tie in what this new administration under President Biden is leading on with Buy American, right? So we've got a big emphasis right now on how we can reshape federal procurement to ensure that we aren't just skipping over making it in America or buying in American. That making in America, though, consideration is really quite profound for where we might have what I like to call the missing middle. Right, Michael? So we might say, oh my goodness gracious, we'd love to buy this in America. We don't make it here. So how do we start making it here? And does the question get answered by the R&D spends or a suite of other policy considerations, some of which are tied to what we need to do for the R&D and some of which are also tied to other support mechanisms for our existing industrial base to develop safely and secure, cyber secure, safe, these production lines that will continue to ensure the resiliency of our supply chain. So this is somewhere that, I'm not going to be able to drive here totally on my own, but I do know with the mechanisms that I have a little bit of a lever on in my subcommittee, particularly with NIST and the manufacturing extension partnerships that fall underneath them, right? There's going to be a lot of opportunity to start to fill that in. So, Michael, I am really eager to work with all of you on that, and I want to. So, expect my phone call.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Chairwoman Stevens. I think that's all the time that we have for this morning for our section. But I'm glad that you introduced the importance of the investments that DoD is making, because we're excited to have the director of the DoD's Joint AI Center join us for the end of the event. So make sure everybody stays tuned for that as well. Should be interesting to see what some of the different investments that they're making. But I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule, and look forward to speaking with you soon.
I am so glad this worked out. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we're going to try and plug in for that session too. That sounds like a really good one. So you guys have a great rest of the day, and kudos to you for getting this done as well. Appreciate y'all.
Very much.
Yeah.
All right. Well, next we'll have our federal AI collaboration panel, and we will have the introduction video for that. Thank you.
Adoption or innovation is not the emerging tech, it's the processes.
My team's been working on developing a number of these AI playbooks as a way to see what are the steps toward having an agency work toward having pilots first, and then doing different opportunities in terms of either acquisitions or developing in-house, and then further scaling up.
Thank you, Mike and Representative Stevens for the wonderful opening to the event. I'm now pleased to move on to the next session of our AI Gov event, a panel about federal AI collaboration and the importance of fostering partnerships and cooperation to develop robust and responsible AI. I'm Melissa Harris, a staff writer and researcher at Government CIO Media and Research, and I'll be moderating this wonderful panel today. Here to join me is Taka Ariga, Government Accountability Office Chief Data Scientist and Innovation Lab Director, Brian Lane, GSA IT Modernization Centers of Excellence AI Lead, and Landon Van Dyke, State Department Office of Management, Strategy and Solutions Chief Technology Officer. Thank you all for joining me today. So just off the bat, I wanted to ask you guys, what are you doing in the AI space? What keeps you busy? And what are you up to at your organizations in the AI space? Taka, do you want to lead us off there?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Melissa. And such a great pleasure to be with the Government CIO audience this morning. As Chairwoman Stevens mentioned, AI is such an important and transformative topic. It's very timely as we continue to modernize agencies. There will be more and more proliferation of the data. There's a lot of federal data strategy progress being made. So at GAO, we have essentially doubled down on how AI can, help shape the way that federal agencies deliver their services, deliver their mission. But GAO does play a unique duality role. As much as we would like to experiment on AI capability, we also know that we need to wear that oversight hat. So there's a lot of sort of experimentation happening through the Innovation Lab in terms of developing natural language processing capability. But at the same time, we have issued a number of reports around AI's application in drug discovery, for example, in healthcare. We have done a number of spotlights, most recently on deepfake and forensic algorithm. And in late June timeframe, we will look to publish our first of its kind AI oversight framework. And it really is meant as a foundational document for an oversight agency such as GAO to start asking questions around performance, around the societal impact that we are all very aware of, and do so in a sort of across the life cycle of AI development. So that we can collectively build that trust across the implementations that are happening across the landscape.
Fantastic. Brian, do you want to take us off? What are you doing in the AI space?
Yeah, thanks so much, Melissa. And again, it's truly a pleasure to be here. So I'm a bit of an odd duck because I have two hats, right? So my first hat is as the co-founder of the AI Center of Excellence at GSA. And I have one role in that particular area. And then my second hat is at the DoD Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. And I've played a number of roles inside that organization as well. So let's first start with kind of the Center of Excellence hat, right? So GSA established the Centers of Excellence with the intent on helping agency-wide IT modernization across a broad range of areas: contact center, customer experience, data and analytics, cloud, et cetera. The AI Center of Excellence is the most recent one that came out as a result of the AI Summit from about a year and a half ago. And so really we're looking to help agencies adopt AI inside their organization. And that can take a number of different forms depending on what the agency's mission is. So part of the Center of Excellence model is to capture these best practices and share them with other agencies. And so through that, we do have an AI capability maturity model that we work together across our different functional areas to really ask the question, if we were an organization, how would we benchmark where we are in AI, and then how could we roadmap and plan where we want to go. When I put my DoD hat on, the JAIC is in a similar situation. They are essentially the AI hub for the department, and they are focused on mission initiative areas that span everything from cybersecurity to healthcare and everything in between. So an extremely broad mission space in that role. I've been able to help them stand up data management and governance processes for the Joint Common Foundation. We've explored some interesting acquisition pathways, both traditional and non-traditional acquisition for AI, which comes with it with a whole host of AI-specific things like IP and data rights and ethics and privacy and transparency and things like that. And most recently now, I'm supporting them with the Business Process Transformation Mission Initiative, which is focused on investment in AI capabilities for back office business processes to help transform the department into a digital, modern, data-driven organization.
Fantastic. Sounds like you have a lot on your plate. And Landon, lastly, do you want to let us know, what are you doing in the AI space?
Thanks, Melissa. And again, it's wonderful to be here and to be here with your audience as well. For State Department, we're a crossroads between domestic and overseas and international engagement. So, for AI, for us, we are using AI, or we're working on bringing it in to improve our operations. Looking at natural language processing to, sift through the thousands of diplomatic cables from diplomats around the world that come in on a weekly basis, and try to do better knowledge management of the information that's coming in. We're obviously trying to improve things like our visas and passport facilities and try to speed up that process. So we're using, again, natural language processing to help us review and do some auditing of visa applications and stuff. We're also looking over at machine learning for our IoT sensors that we have around the world, because most people don't realize the U.S. government, the State Department, we have over 274 consulates and embassies around the world. So we're in 274 cities, lots of buildings out there. We're tracking things from air quality to vehicle telematics to how our equipment's performing in those buildings so that they can stay up and alive. So we're working on those type of areas internally. Externally, we're working on engagement with citizen science and helping come up with ways to standardize citizen science data so that it can be incorporated in the larger science community and improve studies, things like climate change and water pollution and plastic pollution.
Awesome. So it sounds like, all of you are working in collaboration, not just within your agency, across agencies, but also with the public, in your case, Landon. So I just want to go into that a little bit more and ask each of you what collaboration looks like at your agencies. Who are you working with internally to your organizations? Like perhaps it's data scientists or ethics experts, and maybe externally too. Landon, let's go back to you and go in reverse order this time.
Sorry, I was just being interrupted here. 1 second.
Okay.
So what does collaboration look like for us? A lot of it is, it's about preparation for AI. So we're doing a lot of things like ethics implementation, and we're part of the interagency group that's focused on trying to implement some of the guiding principles for ethics and AI. We're looking at, how do we make things auditable? How do we make it transparent? Making sure that our AI implementations are purpose-driven, obviously respectful for citizens and the law. But we're also doing a lot of preparation just on the logistics, the infrastructure, cybersecurity, data storage strategies, sharing agreements between interagencies, just standardization of data sets and cataloging all of that. So, we're working with obviously the OSTP and, obviously OMB and the NSC. But we're also working with HHS because of COVID. We've been working on data strategies for sharing these type of important data sets for not just for DC, but for around the world, for our agencies around the world that are at the embassies. So we're all over the place. If you're at an embassy, you're definitely partner with us. For things like citizen science, we're working with the Wilson Center and with NOAA and with NASA. EPA is helping us with air quality, and obviously things like building equipment, we work with DOE.
Fantastic. Brian, you mentioned before that you're doing a lot of collaborative work across your work at the Centers of Excellence at GSA, and also your work at the JAIC is pretty, intersectional too. Let's move to you. What does collaboration look like in your daily work?
Yeah, great question. And I'll say, last year when we stood up the AI Center of Excellence, kind of the theme of the year was AI is achievable in government. And then, now that we're a year or plus into it, I'm saying AI is a team sport and you don't have to go on this journey alone. And so partnerships and collaboration are very important in both of the hats that I wear. Of course, the GSA Centers of Excellence, they are built upon the idea of partnering with agencies. And our first significant partnership was with USDA. They were our lighthouse agency, and it was a very large, top-down IT modernization effort that included, many partners along the way. Our partnership with the JAIC also has been key. We do have a government-wide focus, and a government-wide focus that is also tailored specifically to individual agency needs. So if we look at government-wide collaboration, we have the RPA Community of Practice, the federal RPA Community of Practice that's run out of GSA. That is one of the most highly engaging communities of practice I've ever been a member of, and they do fantastic work, especially in terms of sharing information about use cases and best practices and landmines to avoid along the way, and they truly are building a strong community of practitioners. And then we also have the Federal AI Community of Practice, which is strives to do the same thing except for AI instead of robotic process automation. So we cast a pretty wide net in terms of external collaboration, government-wide. Internally, we try and work across GSA as an organization. Innovation is one of our core values, and so oftentimes we will find ways to partner with other organizations within GSA, like Office of Government-Wide Policy or other parts of the Technology and Transformation Services, and things like that. The JAIC, and especially with Director Lieutenant General Groen at the helm, one of our number one priorities right now is partnership in the DoD, and specifically cultivating partnerships to provide enabling capabilities and services to help the armed services in their AI adoption. And so those partnerships can take the form of a number of different things, but specifically it's collaboration around delivering AI capabilities. So that could be providing software or analytic tools, helping with data, supporting test and evaluation activities, and even in some cases prototype development, delivery, or scaling infrastructure. So really we cover the full gambit, government-wide, civilian, and military alike in terms of collaboration and partnerships.
Awesome. And Taka, let's turn to you. What does collaboration look like for you?
Yeah, no, thanks, Melissa. And much like what Brian articulated, GAO also has a pan-governmental purview. Statutorily, GAO does look like wide-ranging government policy, program, and operations. So when we talk about developing AI, we don't specifically to narrow our focus on any given domain. And so we really start the process by looking at what is the problem that we're trying to solve. And as opposed to, walk around the hallway with the latest and greatest algorithm to say we have a hammer, we're looking for nails. So I think that's a very important focus. There are certain problems that are amenable to certain type of mathematical techniques. And so not all AIs are created equal. And then secondarily, we're also focusing on the availability and the quality of that data, because that is the foundation of how GAO can do our credible and sort of a quality output. And so data governance is something that we are in parallel tackling in terms of making sure that there is an availability of the data, there's an access to that data, there's lineage and provenance around those data, and how can we evaluate metadata in a way that makes them more AI development friendly. And once we get to the mathematics and the statistics and model development aspects of AI, this is where we have to be really sort of deliberate and purposeful in terms of how we choose them. At GAO, we don't necessarily believe in click and drag in terms of AI development. So there are specific problems that are, for example, jargon heavy, that, for example, are very esoteric or very technical, in where applying a commercially available algorithm may not necessarily make sense, because those algorithms may be trained on commercial data sets as opposed to, let's say, pharmaceutical vocabularies. So there are a number of instances where we identify our own internally developed, for example, natural language processing models or topic modeling algorithm actually perform better than options that we have access to in the commercial space. And so this is an example of how we're really taking that problem-centered approach in how we develop and apply those algorithms and driving those machine learning capabilities. And speaking of partnership, while the Innovation Lab is focused on developing prototypes, we don't want those capabilities just end at the prototype stage. So we are proactively partnering with our IT organization to think about orchestration, about scalability, about productionalizing those AI capabilities so that they can be made broadly accessible across GAO, but I think more importantly, across the oversight community. As a matter of fact, I'm actually partnering with Brian's colleague at GSA. They're helping us really scale our cloud service capability to exactly doing that, to productionalize a lot of our AI capability. And I think I would be remiss not to add the last piece of it here is how do we continually monitor the performance of AI solution so that the data doesn't drift, so that we can reinforce the learning and whatnot. I said the last thing, but one more thing. A lot of this is we can't sort of algorithmically solve our way out of the problem unless we have a workforce that is data literate, that has the capability of consuming output from AI models. So that's another area that GAO is also tackling. So beyond just the mathematics and the algorithmic aspects of it, there's data governance, there's a IT orchestration piece of it, there's a data literacy piece of it. I think all of them have to go hand in hand for AI implementations to be successful.
So Taka, I want to continue chatting with you there about what you're doing. And, you were talking about the oversight work that GAO does. And so, you have to balance looking to use and create prototypes of and also audit AI at the same time. So what challenges do you face in that balance? And how do you look for trustworthy, verifiable AI, both in your own lab and with the AI GAO audits?
Yeah, and that's the $6 billion question, right? And if the FY21 National Defense Authorization Act is any indication, mandate for AI capability will continue to proliferate. And we see that not only at the federal level, but also at the state, and as well as working with our international partners. I think the important aspects of it is you need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? I think we can simultaneously explore machine learning and AI capability, but that also help us to understand the kind of questions that we will need to ask relative to audits of those implementation. So for example, the analogy that I always draw is if you were going to evaluate an AI system, it's very much like going to a car dealership. If you were looking to purchase a car, you wouldn't just read the user manual and make that purchase decision. You will actually test drive the car. And so for us to test drive an AI algorithm, we need to specifically know what are the kind of governance structure that we should evaluate. What are the kind of data sets that we should evaluate? What are the kind of technical artifacts that we should collect and evaluate? And is there the tail end of it in terms of requirements and practices around monitoring, around adversarial attack, and sort of a forward-looking posture? So I think our ability to prototype those solutions is actually very informative to thinking about how GAO can really be thoughtful around the oversight posture that we should be taking. So, you know, I think this sort of experimentation capability is symbiotic with our ability to conduct oversight. And then we continue to play that role in terms of not only working with NIST, but other agencies to think through how do we get those high-level AI principle down to the implementation level and down to the domain level, as Chairwoman Stevens articulated. You know, consideration for self-driving car is very different than, let's say, an AI solution for HR screening or for robotic process automation. So it shouldn't be one size fits all, but I think there are a set of commonality across general life cycle of AI. Our goal is to take that first step to address that general life cycle commonality. And then as we iterate forward, be able to take domain-specific, application-specific approach to AI oversight.
Awesome. Landon, I want to go back to you. You were talking about some of the international collaborations that you have. For example, you work with the Wilson Center and the United Nations in data sharing and such. Can you explain this partnership and the kind of work and best practices you've developed here? As well as, you know, with the citizen science that you've been doing, that's another layer into how you're fostering collaboration into your work. How are you folding the different best practices and work you're doing into this space to tackle some mission areas?
Thanks, Melissa. Great question. Essentially, for us, we are taking a lot of the lessons learned at the federal level of applying AI into our internal activities, along with sharing data with other agencies and applying that to the citizen science activity that we're doing with the Wilson Center and the United Nations. In that scenario, you have lots of different very proactive environmentalists out there collecting lots of data on plastic and air quality and water quality. And they believe that this is very useful for the science community. Unfortunately, the science community, there's a little bit of a disconnect because in many cases, they don't have the right provenance or metadata on the data set that the science community or the citizen science community is trying to give. And so what we're doing is we're going in and we're working with lots of different environmental groups that are collecting this information, including NOAA and NASA, and seeing what we can do to improve the data sets and make them more usable to the science community, and adding the extra metadata, adding the extra or origin story of where this data came from, and coming up with different ways where we can cross-validate this information. Once that information is brought into the science community with all this information, it makes it more AI ready. It makes it more interoperable and easier to digest, and it's easier for them to align this type of data with other data sets that they might already have from satellites or from other land-based or satellite-based sources. So for us, it really is working with people on the ground in different countries that have different scenarios, everything from, they don't have internet on a daily basis 24/7, and how do we help them consolidate data sets that may be sitting around for months on end without a timestamp on it? How do we find the origin for that type of information and still enable it so that you can bring it back into a lot of the labs and use it for machine learning to recognize the difference between air quality, for instance. We're having people take photos of the sky, and we're referencing when they took the photo of the sky with what we understand the air quality to be in that area from either land-based or satellite-based sensors. And by doing that, we're helping the science community come up with ways to recognize a cheaper way to recognize what's the air quality through photos, rather than these $100,000 sensors that we have around the world. So for us, it's a lot of collaboration with just local, international partners, and understanding that their environment is way different than what our environment would be here in the United States, and trying to come up with solutions for them.
Certainly. And Brian, you were mentioning how you have this dual hat, working not only at GSA, but also the JAIC. Can you explain that relationship between the COE and the JAIC, and how partnerships with the JAIC are helping DoD customers out?
Absolutely. And it's one of my favorite things to talk about, honestly. So I'll try not to be too long-winded. So first, the nature of the partnership between COE and the JAIC is mutually beneficial, right? We're learning from each other. The AI Center of Excellence has a mandate to operate across federal agencies regardless of what mission space they're in. And we've had enough time on the ground in other organizations helping with general capacity building and IT modernization. So we have shared resources and best practices on organizational change and helping customers move to the cloud, and data and analytics before the AI Center was stood up. So that's kind of the institutional knowledge that we bring to our partnership with the JAIC. And then the JAIC, of course, has its unique mission space of protecting and promoting American national interests. And, we definitely, like I mentioned before, they cover those mission areas that include cybersecurity and healthcare, everything in between. And so they understand that, and I'm so glad that Landon and Taka both mentioned this. This is a mission space that requires deep interaction with the users, deep understanding of the domain area, and a lot of engineering and feature development in order to deliver AI. So that's kind of our give and take with between the Centers of Excellence and the JAIC, right? The COE have provided some expertise. GSA's bread and butter is acquisition, and we've certainly supported the JAIC in a number of different ways on the acquisition front. And then shared expertise from technical experts in data, cloud, and AI across the board. So this is a mutual learning together kind of relationship. With the JAIC and their mission partners, and I'll give an example of this shortly, but the idea initially was for the JAIC to be an accelerator. There's kind of three core tenets of the JAIC's mission. The first one is product accelerator. The second is enabler and scaler, and so this is through things like infrastructure and resources. And then the third, which I think is really starting to take shape, is the coordination. So the JAIC is the department-wide coordinator for AI. And what that looks like is, as we start to partner with agencies, we're picking up things like general baselines of AI maturity or organizational maturity to adopt AI. And, what are the gaps in skill sets, or what are the things where if you could just give a little nitro boost to an agency or a armed service, they could kind of accelerate on their own AI journey just with a little bit of help. And so the example that I'll give there is the JAIC through the Business Process Transformation Mission partnered with Undersecretary of Defense for Comptroller and the Navy. And the task was pretty straightforward. The Navy has, they have these personnel transaction centers all over the world. When someone goes in to update their personal data in an HR record, that kicks off a bunch of processes on the back end that traditionally are done manually. A few innovators within the organization said, "Hey, I think this workflow is a target that's ripe for automation, and then some potentially machine learning and AI in the future," right? So initially, I was identified as a process to automate. And so what we did is the JAIC provided access to software and capabilities and expertise for the solution design. The comptroller provided an ATO platform and infrastructure to actually do robotic process automation. And the Navy came to us with a use case, and people within the organization that were committed to solving it. And, for very what I would consider to be low level of effort and investment. They have a working prototype that has now been transitioned to production environment. It is deployed in one location. The initial scaling plan is to go to 2 more in the near term, with the potential of expanding to 13 locations across the globe, reducing workload for this specific task by 50%. And this was not a multi-billion-dollar, big budget line item. This was an innovation project that the barrier to entry was so low and the impact is so high. It's a no-brainer to scale it.
Fantastic. So we've talked a lot about the collaboration happening between agencies, and even within and with the international space as well. But part of federal AI collaboration is with the partnership in industry. So I wanted to ask you guys, what are your pain points in your AI development, or what are you trying to do with AI that industry partners can help you with? Brian, I'm going to turn it back to you. You can start us off. What are your pain points?
Oof, pain points. Okay, so I think that there's a couple things, right? For us, especially, I'm going to put on my business process transformation hat here, right? Our pain points are almost completely like structural within an organization and a culture, right? And so oftentimes these are areas that have been underinvested in from a technology point of view. And, when we partner with industry, sometimes even the right capabilities don't stick because they get rejected by the culture and rejected by the organization. So internally, I think definitely our biggest pain point is getting things to stick and changing the organizational culture. From an industry partnership point of view, I would say, assume we do the procurement, we have the capabilities and we're ready to go. Oftentimes what can slow things down, especially when we talk about automation and deploying new software and things like that, is the ATO process. And I don't mean to say that just to, because that always seems to be the target, but it really is. And at the end of the day, it's about managing risk and enabling organizations and industry partners to do things to help benefit the mission and to deliver better service to the American public. And, as long as we keep sight of that, these are obstacles and pain points that can be overcome. Honestly, I am not going to talk about pain points without giving at least one good thing. So I will say that there's been a tremendous amount of work in terms of both exploring traditional and non-traditional ways to do acquisition to get the right vendors in. Oftentimes, having the right capabilities and the right vendors at the right time is a challenge. And I've seen the federal acquisition workforce really rise to that challenge and figure out, how do we get the timing and the capabilities and the industry partners all in sync. And I think we've done a tremendous amount of work there in terms of both traditional and non-traditional acquisition.
Fantastic. Taka, let's go back to you. What are your pain points and how can industry help you out?
Yeah, I just want to reinforce what Brian said. The AI graveyard is littered with examples of ATOs and procurement challenges. Best of intention often sort of hits a very jarring breaking point when folks think that FedRAMP equates to an ATO, for example. I think we all have experienced certain amount of pain points relative to how do we buy AI-related product, infrastructure, and services. Those are usually typically measured in months and years, not days and weeks in terms of the speed that we need them to go to. So I think those are a pretty common challenge. But for GAO specifically, one of the key interaction area that we have with our infrastructure provider, service provider, is to make sure that they understand GAO specific requirements around appropriateness of the models and algorithm that we use. Because we do oversight report, many of the work that we do have to be replicable and have to have a certain amount of transparency. So even if an AI product is the greatest thing since sliced bread, if it's cloaked around black box and proprietary and IP rights and whatnot, and we're not able to peel under the hood, more likely than not, it would not be appropriate for us to apply that in a mission delivery setting. It won't pass our quality control. It certainly won't pass many of other milestones that we need to be able to sustain our quality and credibility and be able to defend our work. So I think those are the kind of conversations that we routinely have with service vendor. I think it's very similar to some of the buy versus develop, kind of conversations that we do. So from a prototyping perspective, we're always open to evaluate new capabilities, but we're very real when it comes to having those conversations around appropriateness of those capabilities. Sometimes that leads to good news, sometimes that leads to a bad news, but I think that is the point of the conversation. By being candid, that helps not only the federal government, but also the service and product providers to be able to be more targeted with individual mission needs, individual agency needs. So it's not just, one AI that rules them all kind of conversation.
All right, and Landon, we're coming up at time, so take us away. What's
right.
key points?
Thank you. I'll just reinforce Brian and Taka's comments. It very much for the vendors when they come in, they come in with all the greatest intentions, but many times the solutions that they're providing are holistic, and to safeguard the government, safeguard American citizens. Our architecture and how data is stored, shared, and evaluated and used doesn't always equate to that holistic AI platform that most people want to bring in. We need to have more targeted capabilities. That said, one of the other pain points, though, is it's so democratized. It's so easy now for many different bureaus and offices. And remember, we're in 274 cities, so we have IT specialists at all of our embassies, and they look at these things and they say, we could just use a small piece of this, and we will do a procurement of this. And for us, it's a challenge to just track all of these procurements and ensure that they are aligned with our architecture, our full cybersecurity State Department architecture around the world. And so in one sense, it's great that you have this universal platform that can do pretty much data storage and ETLing and metadata and cataloging and analysis, but at the same time, it doesn't always fit with the larger architecture that the department has. And so for us, it's a balance between helping people continue the mission and meet the mission, and at the same time ensuring that we have the proper ethical and cybersecurity safeguards in place, and we're aware of what's going on holistically around the world. And those are challenges that we have when we're working with vendors. And of course, I would be remiss to say that, it's also a little bit of a challenge for budget. When we're working with vendors and we know we want to be able to plan 5 years out, it's sometimes challenging to say, okay, we can prototype something, but we're not sure if we'll have the budget next year to actually operationalize something. So that it's always a fun balance in government to try to work with vendors that understand the nature of the federal government and how money is dispersed through large batches and then small batches and large batches. And sometimes it's not as predictable as we would like.
Yeah, we all aspire to have Jake's budget at some point.
There you go.
One day. Well, we're at time. I want to thank the three of you for joining me today for this wonderful panel. I'll now pass the baton to my colleague, David Chandler, to lead our next panel, which will be about improving research and diagnostics with data analytics.
AI has become a really important part of what we do, and it's really been enabled by the technologies of the cloud, GPUs, and other techniques which have just made machine learning techniques, deep neural networks, and other elements of AI feasible in ways that we've never thought before.
The volumes of data we're looking at with some of the Medicare claims data, it's a lot for a single person to look at. So we're trying to leverage AI and ML techniques to help us rapidly build these models and help us pinpoint where we need to focus on investigative effort.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to our previous panelists. AI and complex data analytics are pushing the frontiers of medical research and diagnostics, all the while improving treatment and detection of the disease within patients. During this panel, we'll discuss how new methodologies are leading to better patient outcomes, as well as how data analytics are allowing for better insights into complex medical conditions. We have an exciting panel of experts who will provide us with further insight into these emerging and fascinating research and diagnostic areas. Joining us today, we have Dr. Gil Alteravis, the Director of National Artificial Intelligence Institute at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and Dr. Moshe Levy, a Professor of Biochemistry in the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology at Georgetown University. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
So I want to start with a question for both of you. What is top of mind at your organizations in regards to AI and data analytics for research? Dr. Levy, I'll begin with you.
So regarding AI at Georgetown, we're getting organized. We have a number of people who are already working on it. Part of the application is more basic science oriented, where we analyze data sets, gene arrays such as RNA-seq, proteomics, metabolomics. Then those are from basic research models are extended to patient samples. And the idea is to pull together all the data sets and come up with pathways that can be targeted for treatment. In addition, there is also a component of AI being applied, and I'm involved with that with other universities to look at analyze biopsies, for example, different histological stains, etc., to make specific diagnoses that can be easily missed by the simple eye. And then eventually we want to couple that to the other data set. And finally, something that's been going on for a while is application of AI in radiology, for example, CAT scans, MRIs, and trying to diagnose lesions, tumors, for example, that are easily missed by the eye.
Fascinating. Gil, what's top of mind at your organization?
Yeah, so there's a number of different applications and kind of frameworks that are being developed that can be applied to that. So I want to really first echo a number of the different application areas that Dr. Levy was mentioning. We've been looking at a number of those and applying them specifically to the veteran population. So sometimes work that happens outside the VA, whether it be, Georgetown or other universities, we can apply that to a veteran population using techniques such as transfer learning and so forth. But at the same time, we have to be really mindful and ensure that we look at and ensure that we're leveraging kind of concepts of trustworthy AI. There was actually recently an executive order on promoting the use of trustworthy AI and looking at a number of things relative to making sure that it's not only performance driven, but also is understandable, responsible and traceable, regularly monitored and transparent, things like that, and accountable. And so we're working to ensure that that framework it takes place and is utilized in all the different applications and evaluating them. And if it doesn't fit within that kind of minimum bar framework, then those use cases basically would not take place, right? And so there's kind of that analysis of the cost benefit, and there, you know, and it really has kind of different points. So, you know, if you look at the diagnostic applications, or you may look at screening, where other people then look at additional piece of information, you know, it's one thing, but if it's something that it may be a therapeutic that could, you know, have a toxic result, you know, it may need a different level. So in terms of a few exciting applications, just very briefly, you know, I think one is around looking at lung cancer, prostate cancer. Precision oncology has a lot of opportunities. Imaging is an area that really is really enabled by a lot of the deep learning approaches. We've got researchers who are focusing on how do you represent that information in a way that can be optimally used within artificial intelligence, making that AI-ready data. We've got investigators who are applying existing methods to just the large data sets that are available within the VA. So there's really kind of that wide range of applications, from kind of fundamental ones to and developments, all the way to kind of applied technologies and using it in operations.
Outstanding. That leads me actually as a good segue into my next question, which is what are some of the complex medical conditions your organizations are looking at right now, and how are you using data insights to improve patient outcomes? Gil, the VA has the largest genomic database in the world for healthcare information. Can you talk about how you're leveraging that?
Right. So there's that's an exciting kind of resource that the veterans have essentially provided and made available for the VA to help in a number of different conditions of importance to veterans, and so what it involves, the Million Veteran program basically is where veterans will basically donate a genomic sample, a sample where the genomics is done, and that can then be linked to their medical record information and any other information that that is made available, maybe whether it be surveys and other labs and so forth. And so that is all collected, and then there's different programs to enable research to be done with that. So for example, there's a collaborative program, the MVP Champion and other programs that work together to enable the analysis of that. So for example, in the MVP Champion program, there's a collaboration with the Department of Energy to leverage their supercomputing capabilities. And there are 3 pilots around that, including you know, prostate cancer and a couple others that basically leverage and combine the expertise and computing within the Department of Energy and the clinical expertise, the computing kind of knowledge and so forth that's available within the VA as well, putting those together to come up with new algorithms and ways to bring that to care for the actual patients.
Dr. Levy, the same question for you. What are some of the complex medical conditions your organization is looking at right now?
So to go along with what Gil was saying, for example, taking cancer as an example, it's being leveraged for both identifying pathways that are involved that can be targeted and extending all the way to the concept of personalized medicine, depending on the pathways that are involved, the specific patients, any kind of genomic or related data, either from gene analysis from the tumor to biomarkers in the serum, and trying to come up with the best treatment modalities, and then use the further data that's used in a feedback mechanism to determine if the predictions are correct and if it makes any difference to the different treatment modalities that are used. So the application in cancer is tremendous, but it's slowly diffusing in the other areas, like into the neurosciences cognitive dysfunction, Alzheimer's disease specifically.
Fascinating stuff. Gil, for a while now, the VA has been working on AI tools to predict mortality rates and a framework to integrate R&D modules into clinical systems. How's the progress on that been going? And has there been any impact in these efforts because of COVID-19?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've got the AI to go and to point of care system where our goal is to basically enable enable trustworthy AI essentially. So enabling all the different parts where you have methods that come from research to actually be leveraged in practice. And so you need to make sure that it involves trustworthy AI. You need to make sure that clinicians can understand and would like to adopt the algorithms to get their input and have that iterative process. And so we found actually that it was really interesting in COVID. It actually made things move faster because it was a use case that really presented an immediate need, right? So let's say a surge is happening in a particular location or across multiple locations. There's that need to essentially pilot and leverage such systems so that you can get things used more quickly. And so COVID has actually increased and allowed us to learn about new processes and new ways to move faster in terms of getting work from research into practice. So that's really been interesting. Specifically, actually, with one of the COVID modules, that one's now being piloted and led to a couple of interesting findings and uses that where the clinicians and the people that were looking at that in terms of operational uses were able to leverage it in ways that they had not planned, and they communicated that then to other clinicians, and essentially that kind of spread through the network. And so really there's a lot of new ways of thinking that are coming about from this approach that COVID has really enabled people to think in new ways. And it's really, in that sense, something that I think will carry forward into the future, kind of a new way of thinking about processes where clinicians, researchers are working together in this iterative way so that for the benefit of the veterans.
I want to stay on the topic of COVID-19, and this one is for you, Dr. Levy. We've been able to figure out a lot about certain trends and pre-existing health conditions that are correlated to higher complication rates in COVID-19, such as obesity and age. Can you explain how data has played a role in your findings behind this, and generally what information you've discovered throughout the pandemic in your R&D?
So as COVID started spreading out, it became clear the conditions you mentioned, obesity, diabetes, and aging, were major risk factors. And so going along the lines of the cytokine storm or accelerated inflammatory stage, we started accessing data sets that were available actually from SARS-CoV-2 infected cell lines and later biospecimens. And we identified pathways that went along with our basic research with those models. We happened to be researching in my lab the effects of obesity, diabetes, and aging, for example, in the kidney and other organs, but mainly kidney. And we identify a pathway that was similarly upregulated following COVID-19 infection that was already activated without infection under those conditions. So we have, started going after those pathways. We don't have the data yet because we have to do intervention studies to prove whether our predictions are correct or not. But that was very helpful in coming with, because it was not clear, sometimes you see associations without necessarily any cellular mechanisms, but in this case, we had some leads that we're following. for the pulmonary complications and GI, renal complications, vascular complications. We're actively working with 4 institutions in our area: Virginia Tech, ourselves, Johns Hopkins, and a lot of bioinformatics.
That leads, did you want to add something to that, Gil, or?
No, well, just yeah, I was just basically nodding in agreement. I think that's really, you know, it's really interesting that all these fields sort of come together when you think about it. There are a number of ways that, you know, AI, you know, can be leveraged in bioinformatics, as Dr. Levy was saying, and kind of vice versa in terms of representations of data that can help AI. So it's kind of a synergistic ecosystem in some way. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that kind of leads into the next question as well. One area we've been seeing across the board in health is the increasing incorporation of data capabilities and access to researchers to help further health and medical research. In what ways do you see this happening, and where is there room for improvement? Gil, I'll shoot that one over to you.
Yeah, right. So there's a lot of you know, different you know, capabilities where you're really increasing the incorporation of the data capabilities, and that, you know, it's really important to look at the different ways of doing that, right? So the access, you know, the researchers need access to the data need to essentially have access to the researchers to be leveraged. I think when you know, in terms of room for improvement, there's really a need to think of different ways that the data would be used. Different data have different ways that they can be leveraged and made AI ready. They can have different representations. They can be encapsulated in different types of standardized modeling approaches. And for different types of problems, they need to be kind of mapped in different ways. And so that's an area that I think kind of it needs potentially further development, and also could be really useful, because if you had harmonization, you could share not only across different research areas, but also across different departments and so forth to make that available and useful for a healthcare, so that research is then useful for a healthcare setting. Yeah, I think that would be the main thing that would really help in improving that moving forward.
Dr. Levy, it sounds like you're doing some of this already with the consortium of universities that you just described, but in terms of how we can further help in medical research, what ways, in addition to how you described, you see this happening, and where's there room for improvement? What would you like to see next?
Well, so number one has to be awareness. Different schools, different departments, different clinicians, where the patient data is gathered. Number two is to be able to do all the analysis and put it together. And so that's a little bit, it's easier to take one data set, RNA, for example, sequencing and analyzing it. And even there are different software programs that we use, identify the genetic basis, but we also know that the proteins are very critical. We also know, furthermore, that post-translational, there's modifications of the proteins that really determine their activity. So you can have gene A go up, protein go up, but it can be modified. So there's modifications along the way. And once you start doing that, the data sets are incredibly complex. So it's really beyond of regular, investigators, labs, departments. So it has to be more of what we call, I'm a former engineer, so now all my engineering departments, they call themselves chemical and biological engineering, going into the systems biology, physiology, looking at the whole thing together. So that's going to be the challenge. And also the challenge will be whether we think that whatever artificial intelligence programs that are being used, are they really doing the right thing? I mean, that's going to take a lot of validation. But that's what we need to do, because there's no way for me to look at the data sets. Maybe I can pick up one or two, but not the whole picture together.
Sure. We've been talking a lot about data, but I think the goal of this is to improve patient outcomes.
Yes.
What can we do better to connect data and advanced analytics and AI tools to that mission and improving patient outcomes? Gil?
But patients are very heterogeneous, right?
Yeah.
And so if we look at the average data set, it may or may not apply for a given subject. Even you pick up, diabetes, or you pick up diet, what kind of diet, what kind of exercise, what kind of medications. So we get the average information, but ultimately for more precise medicine, we'll have to plug in the specific subjects, whatever information we have, to come up with some predictions and see how they respond. I can tell you that not everybody responds to blood pressure treatment the same way. So we learned that a long time ago. And there is regional variations, ethnic genetic backgrounds, and then together with precision medicine, you also have to do precision, backgrounds of the patients, their socioeconomic environments. So it's maybe Gil at the VA has a way to deal with that, but.
Well, thanks, Dr. Levy. I want to also take a different angle and talk about how you connect the data to the advanced analytics, as David was saying. I think it's really it comes down to a fundamental point, because right now I think many systems, when you look at them, they actually have two different systems. One that's used for the research setting, the supercomputers, the clusters, and so forth, where you develop the AI models, right? And then there's a different system, which is the one that's used, clinically and so forth, and doesn't have the same analytical capabilities, so there's kind of that dichotomy. And so in the future, there may be a better way to kind of connect these systems. Right now, essentially, usually you build a system in the first one, as I mentioned, the more research-like setting, and you develop the model. And it's true that developing the model does take kind of the most computing generally to actually learn and develop the model. And then you apply the model within the more clinical one, which is, it's much less powerful in terms of computing capabilities, and less power is needed to actually do inference and apply. But going into the future, when we start thinking about iteration and learning continuously and some of those kind of concepts, it's going to be important to have a stronger bridge between the data and the analytical capabilities, both at the research setting where you're originally building it, but then also at the medical setting, and to be able to do those analytics there. And so having either a bridge or having a compatible formats that are easy to transfer between those different settings is going to be useful. And we see that in a number of cases now going on in terms of around trustworthy AI, whether it be FDA with some of their new guidance around software as a medical device for AI that continuously learns, so that it can continue to have approval after it can continue to learn after it gets approval, to systems that receive feedback and integration of new information from clinicians. So there's a number of ways that I think when we think about connecting data to analytics, to think about it in a way that research can have the biggest impact on patient outcomes by thinking about the infrastructure underneath that and connecting those worlds.
I want to stick with you on this one, Gil, and to the point that you were just making. What are some of the tools that are out in the field that you're excited about, that you think that we can be iterating on in a game-changing way to improve the care that is delivered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there are a number of tools that don't include AI that I think with AI could really benefit. And some of them, when you think about it, you're talking about delivering care. Some of them really involve things that are not directly related to care, right? They may be, we've seen different offices in the VA working together around, for example, being able to process benefits and forms, or forms for different ways to receive medical care, and different areas where natural language processing can help to translate notes into usable information in a faster way, clinical notes. And so some of these are not actually directly involved in delivering the care itself, but they really provide increased productivity that allows then physicians and others to have more time to spend with the patient, and to to not use up time on some of the on some of these aspects that maybe are not in their area of expertise, but that they need to do that paperwork and so forth. This helps them have more time to serve as a physician, caregiver, and these other roles to better help the veteran. So I think that's the general type of category of kind of game-changing areas that can help in delivering care. Of course, they're the kind of really exciting ones, whether it be around looking at images for lung cancer with augmented reality and enhanced by artificial intelligence and all that. Those, of course, will have an impact within their field. I feel that some of these other ones that are kind of maybe not seen at the front office kind of setting, but more in the back end, are ones that will actually make the biggest or a really game-changing difference in terms of how care ends up being delivered overall.
I think you make a good point, and so I'll adjust the question a bit for you, Dr. Levy. So zooming out a bit, what are some of the game-changing areas of focus where AI could potentially be incorporated and it have better outcomes and improve the delivery of care? So not just focused on tools, but areas that you think we could, bring the two together and it could be game changing.
Well, I mean, leading on the example of imaging, for example, for me, if you can couple the images that you obtain and are analyzed in a sophisticated manner from MRIs or CAT scans to actually, the biopsies and what they indicate when you do gene analysis, etc., and see if there's a way, put those information together in a way that forward going, the MRI image will correlate to actually what's happening within the tumor. That will be incredible if we can do that. That's just one example. We're doing this for kidney biopsies, imaging the kidney biopsies and imaging the analysis, molecular analysis, and see how we can correlate those. That's the ultimate.
That's great. Well, we're out of time, and I want to thank both of you for joining us today on this fantastic panel. Thank you all again, and I'll pass it off to our next panel, AI and Advanced Data Analytics for National Security.
Thanks for having us.
The United States government has access to data, which is absolutely critical to artificial intelligence. And if we get the agencies of the government working in a way that promotes this and helps create opportunity, then we'll see this thing take off in a positive way.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our discussion around AI and advanced analytics on national security. I'm Ray Lopresti, a Senior Solutions Architect at Government CIO, and I'll be moderating today's talk. Let's get started with our panel. Let me introduce Dr. Jill Chrisman, the Principal Director for Artificial Intelligence at the Research and Engineering at the Department of Defense, Professor Daniela Russ at the Computer Science and AI Lab Director, MIT, also a member of the Defense Innovation Board, Brian Gattone, CTO at CISA, and Jim Richburg, CISO at Public Sector Fortinet. So I want to get started with an open question to the panel. And let me preface this by saying the first two segments we heard around artificial intelligence and data, around the GSA's use of it, around our healthcare use of it, and our focus around national security and intelligence. So very open question here. How has artificial intelligence and data analytics impacted your respective areas? Jill, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So as Principal Director of AI for Research and Engineering in the Department of Defense, I look at the potential of AI to revolutionize the defense of our country. AI holds the promise to more rapidly and accurately detect threats, fuse multi-domain information sources to understand the operational picture, make faster and more advantageous tactical decisions, and predict possible tactical and operational outcomes. The end result will be a quickening of the pace of combat and the significant advantage to the military that can adopt and deploy AI most effectively.
Thanks. Professor Russ?
So let me build on what Jill said. I'm a professor. I'm a scientist, and in my field, I have seen a bonanza of activity because all of a sudden, these technologies that we have been working on as researchers, as educators for decades, are now making an impact, and the impact is really broad, and there's so much optimism for the kinds of things that we can do with AI. We can move things, people, and goods faster and more efficiently. We can better diagnose, monitor, and treat disease. We can keep your information private and safe. We can enable communication across the globe, no matter what your language, much more easily. We can ensure that our roadways are safe. In general, we can offload to machines, low-level routine tasks, so that people can focus on higher-level activities that require critical thinking. And there's so much opportunity in business, in national defense, in education, in research, because I should tell you the technology is not perfect. We still need to advance it. In fact, it's important to, as we think about AI, it's important to remember that despite this great promise on the technical side, some of today's greatest advances are due to decades-old ideas enhanced by vast amounts of data and computation. And so we need new technical ideas. We need the funding to back them, and we need more people understanding and working in the field. We also need infrastructure so that we can deliver on the promise of AI. Now, with respect to national defense, I just want to flag one project we are doing at MIT. It's called the AI Accelerator. It's a project we've embarked on together with the Air Force. And the objective is to speed up the time it takes to get ideas from the research lab into production, especially for defense applications. And in our project, we have interdisciplinary teams that include MIT researchers from Lincoln Labs, Air Force, airmen, and we're all working together to advance the science and engineering of intelligence. And then with the domain expertise from the Air Force and from Lincoln Labs, the idea is that those new advancements could then be well understood and taken towards product development much faster, definitely much faster than without being together to see how the basic technologies is being developed.
Fantastic. Thank you, Daniela. Brian, what's your perspective from CISA?
So our perspective at CISA is core to our mission. We serve as the nation's risk advisor. Through our efforts to understand and advise on cyber and physical risks to critical infrastructure, we help our partners strengthen their own resilience and their own capabilities. We connect our stakeholders in industry and government to each other and to the resources, analysis, and tools that helps them build out their own cyber, communications, and physical security and resilience. And in turn, that strengthens national resilience. And if that's our operational calling, then the logistics that supports that operation is data and analytics. As a risk advisement organization, we bring in data, we do our work to add value to it, and then disperse it to those that need it and can consume it for their risk decisions. We do this in a number of operational priority areas. One, improving the supply chain security against cyber threats from malicious nation-state actors, and specifically in the rollout of 5G technologies. We help protect federal networks in the civilian.gov domain. We have responsibilities in soft target security, election security, and critical infrastructure protection, including industrial control systems and the processes that provide vital services to our critical infrastructure. All of the data that supports decision-making in these areas can benefit from a robust conversation on how data and analytics can improve and where the promise of artificial intelligence can help us make good decisions faster. Whatever quality of positivity you ascribe to what you want out of artificial intelligence, we're interested in that conversation as it relates to managing risk to national critical functions. I appreciate you all having us here for this conversation.
Thanks, Brian. Jim, you got the public perspective from the public sector.
So, you know, Ray, I spent 34 years in the intelligence community, and now I'm 2 years into working with public sector customers at one of the world's largest security companies. And from this latter perch, being in the private sector now, AI and machine learning are absolutely foundational to our ability to operate for the big cybersecurity providers like Fortinet. And if you look at the scope and scale of what we're trying to do, I think it's pretty self-evident. We work with 500,000 public and private sector customers with networks worldwide. We deployed at their network edge, we're in their core, we're in their cloud. And with the devices we've got in those environments that are both sensors that are generating the data that's coming back to our global security operations center and threat research group, it's generating on an average day 100 billion or more, billion with a B, security events that we need to look at. There's not enough people on Earth, much less on our payroll, to make sense of that data, absent AI and machine learning, to allow you to do the kind of correlation, to recognize that most of these are just odd but not malicious, and to figure out how to operate against this. So there's no way you can get this kind of global understanding of what's going on, much less build a common operating picture and then respond to it without using AI and ML. Otherwise, this industry would be not federated. We'd be providing siloed capability to specific agencies.
Great. Thanks, Jim. I'm going to change the focus here and move away from the technical aspects of AI and look at the ethical aspects of it. I think we could all go back to last summer, and there was an uproar about the use of facial recognition. Now, I picked facial recognition. We could use artificial intelligence within drones and the autonomous nature of drones. But my question is, how do we balance the growth of AI in law enforcement or in national security with ethical considerations, considerations around privacy? Daniela, would you like to kick us off with this one?
That's a very good question, and it's very important. We have a very powerful technology. We have to be responsible. We have to think hard about how to use it. So with respect to the specific case of face recognition, I would like to say that it's known that all the algorithms we use in machine learning depend on data, and their performance is only as good as the data used to train them. There are known biases, and since last summer we have had increasingly more results that talk about biases in these systems. So we have to understand how the technology works. We have to understand when the technology doesn't work. And then we have to think about what to do about it. With face recognition, the bias is extraordinary. And it's been documented so many times that, the response of face recognition is different for according to race. And in particular, it's very bad for women with dark color skin. So what to do about that? Well, some of the solutions can be technological. For example, in my research group, we are working extensively on algorithms that allow us to assess the uncertainty of a machine learning model, tie that to the uncertainty in the data used to train the model, and then fix the bias, debias the system. And so there can be technological solutions that we could adapt. But then as we think about the applications for these technologies, including face recognition, we also have to consider what is right, what is not right. What can the technology do? What can't the technology do? When should we use it? When should we not use it? And I would like to share with you 5 principles for AI ethics that was developed as part of our work with the Defense Innovation Board. And so the principles in our report include responsibility, meaning that human beings should always exercise appropriate levels of judgment and remain responsible for the development, deployment, use, and outcomes of AI systems. The second is equitability, meaning that we need to take deliberate steps to anticipate and avoid unintended bias and unintended consequences. Third is traceability, meaning that the AI engineering discipline should be sufficiently advanced such that technical experts possess an appropriate understanding of the technology, of the development process, and the operational methods of AI. And as I said in the answer to the previous question, there is much to be done to address some of the limitations of today's AI systems. The fourth principle is reliability, meaning that AI systems should have an explicit, well-defined domain of use, and the safety, security, and robustness of these systems should be tested and assured. And the fifth principle is governance, meaning that AI systems should be designed and engineered to fulfill their intended function while possessing the ability to detect and avoid unintended harm or disruption and pass control over to those users. So beyond these general principles, we also need to look at all technical advances with both an eye towards what benefits they can have, but also what policy actions are needed to stem possible dangers.
Thanks. Jill?
I have to thank Daniela because she covered a part of what I wanted to talk about, because I was going to actually address the DoD has adopted actually those ethical principles that the Defense Innovation Board had suggested. The Secretary of Defense signed them in February of this year. So it's actually February of 2020. So they've been in effect for a year now. But it's you know, those are actually governing somewhat how you build AI, but there's also how we use it. And one of the things that's within the Department of Defense, we have laws of war. And those laws actually extend to using autonomous systems, of which sometimes AI is counted as. And these laws actually help ensure that AI-enabled systems or any other system that's autonomous that we deploy in the department are ethically deployed. And so we have scientists and engineers working with academia and outside to actually examine those laws and determine if these need to be updated based on the advent of AI. But this is something the department is seriously considering. So we are taking seriously the ethical use of AI in the department and studying it very carefully.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Daniela. Let's move on and look at the actual impact of AI on cybersecurity. Let's look at cybersecurity, if you will, from both a defensive nature and if you wish, an offensive nature. Brian, as the CTO at CISA, How do you see AI impacting you and safeguarding the cybersecurity of our infrastructure as well as DHS?
So as the CTO at CISA, I look at new and emerging technologies from three perspectives. One, a sort of selfish perspective. If we adopt a technology for our mission use, how's it going to help us do our job? Two, if our stakeholders or customers adopt that technology for their business enterprise, what does it do to their attack surface or risk profile, whether they're using it for cybersecurity or just their general business? And then three, because our adversaries get a vote in the risk equation, what does it mean for our adversaries to potentially leverage this technology to drive their means? And then the counter move to position ourselves to be successful, to protect our stakeholders, and to deny our adversaries their goals. How I see AI impacting cybersecurity for this conversation, I think it's interesting to discuss from the stakeholder view what it means to improve your use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data and analytics technologies in your enterprise. These are now, robust and complicated systems with a changing IT infrastructure, with changing data standards. It takes some of the general cyber hygiene rules that CISA's been pushing quite a bit to the forefront when you're talking about data that's used to automate decisions and optimize your enterprise. That data is now probably higher value than you may have considered it before, and that bears some burden to protect it a little bit better. You don't want to invest heavily in an enterprise in a data and analytics infrastructure that optimizes your output and not consider the risk of that data being locked up in a ransomware campaign. So if folks are interested, I could push them to the CISA.gov website, where we've recently published out a reduce the risk of ransomware campaign to get focus and coordinated effort on the idea that data as a critical asset for your enterprise is subject to ransomware problems, and they can lock you out of it and really do damage to what it is you do. And for us, for our customers who are providing nationally critical functions, we have a vested interest in making sure that as they adopt these advanced data technologies, that they do so in considering the cybersecurity implications for loss of access to that data to their enterprise, loss of that data in terms of it being stolen for others, or to where you've started to incorporate that data into artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms, how that data could be manipulated, poisoned, or changed to cause you to make different decisions than you had intended to. And all of that's in the risk equation and understanding where artificial intelligence can help you, but also presents an opportunity to increase your attack surface. And we just ask that folks really maintain awareness of those dimensions as they move into this space.
Thanks, Brian. So Jim, how, as from the public sector, how could our vendor community help CTOs like Brian meet his objectives and safeguard the infrastructure?
So Ray, we actually, I think, are on the cusp of a transformation. And I always say this with reluctance because I don't want to sound like a fanboy for AI as the latest fad, but I think the intersection of increasingly mature and powerful AI and ML in the cybersecurity industry, and the reality is that industry has been using it in production for a decade. We got into it not long after some of the big firms we think of for big data analytics started doing it. So we've been using it, we've been getting better, we're using it more broadly now, but the intersection of that with this idea of broad platforms, common sensors and controls that don't have to come from one company, but that share an ecosystem that can feed a common data lake that can support each other, instrument the attack surface. And that generates the data, and the AI and ML is increasingly becoming the decision engine for correlation, for making sense of it, and then for policy-driven automated action to take advantage of it. Again, I come at this from the perspective of somebody who played offense when I was in government. We were never invisible, omnipotent cyber ninjas. We would typically try and fail before we get into a network. We would hope our failures would look like anomalies rather than something intentional. We relied on the fact that the defenders can't be looking everywhere all of the time. And even if they did see us in action, They wouldn't know if that's a false positive, which most alerts are, or a genuine event. And if they thought it was significant, is it a nuisance, a tier 1 alert, or something serious? And if it's serious, how do I respond to it? That's what attackers have exploited. And this is what this broad attempt at instrumentation powered by AI and ML puts you in the position of changing. And there are niches, it's an arms race. There are parts of AI and ML that will asymmetrically favor the attacker. One that springs to mind is using AI for generative content for spear phishing. That's one where even open source programs are getting good enough to fool the experts. So look at the spear phishing now to not only steal your user ID and your credentials, but your email inbox and outbox so that the stuff comes out tailored enough to fool their experts. But on balance, this is a data-driven arms race that the network defenders, I think, are positioned to win.
Thanks, Jim. Jill, looking at defense, and this is also open to anyone else who would like to pitch in an idea here. Obviously, this is all data intensive, and the warfighter has to make decisions faster. We have on the verge of hypersonic weapons flying at Mach 6. How are you looking at the ability for you in the DoD to collect and fuse data from the various sensors and sources to develop this common operating picture that the warfighter then can use?
Yeah, so, you know, the idea that AI can fuse and aggregate all that data and create a common operating picture is an idea that's been around for a long time. But certainly the big data and machine learning revolution is actually providing real opportunities now to actualize those visions of that common operating picture, which we've in the past had difficulties obtaining. So we can now look to a new generation of things like the command post of the future, where we can move beyond sort of tactical decision making to address the harder problem of sort of pre-conflict understanding, like potentially the Strategic Capabilities Office's C2IE effort, which is looking at, you know, what's happening before we're actually engaged in war. But beyond specific programs like this, you'd like to talk about the potential to address this intelligence fusion and decision-making process in an agile way. So it's not that these weapons or these people are going to have a static thing. Our adversaries are constantly changing their attack. So we need to have sort of users in the loop. We need to make evolutionary changes. And we need to push improvements out every day instead of every other year. And then we need to receive user feedback immediately. So I view a lot of this sort of common operating picture as actually adapting to the various, as our adversaries change their attacks, we need to actually adapt to that and put new information into that common operating picture to run effectively as a military. So very fascinating in the department right now. We have software factories. They're developing these types of capabilities to actually update software and redeploy it. They're starting to adopt machine learning, and we want to basically adopt better and more machine learning in that process. And I want to encourage these software factories to actually sort of be involved in rapidly developing software so that we can actually expand our capabilities in these warfighting domains.
Great, thanks, Jill. Daniela, from an MIT perspective, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so the question of fusing and collating data is very important from a technological point of view. It's because data brings different aspects of different data brings different aspects of the situation awareness, and so it is really important to develop algorithms that are efficient and integrate multiple types of data. The applications are broad. The applications include medicine, where maybe you have handwritten notes that need to be fused with imaging data items, and similar heterogeneous data streams occur in national defense and in other applications. And so this is a very hot topic, and people are working on this. I will tell you that in one of our recent results, we've been looking at how to integrate camera data with laser scanning data to enable better autonomous driving. And we have found that by integrating the two, we can do things that we couldn't do with one or the other individually. And so in particular, we can better detect the model and type of the vehicles surrounding the ego vehicle, what else they're doing on the roadways. And so this kind of higher level abstractions that can be learned by combining multiple data sources are very promising.
Great, thank you so much. Hey, Jim, I'm going to ask you for your commercial sector perspective again, and I'm going to look at the other panelists to basically ask Jim for if you had a wish list of what the vendor community could do and see what he would think about it. But in this case, Jim, how do you see AI assisting specifically the security staff in managing those billions of cybersecurity incidents, everywhere from the identification through the remediation and the automation of the entire process?
It's a force multiplier. You know, depends on whose numbers you believe. We're multi-million people short in the cybersecurity field, and they don't have the right skills. And I've got to tell you, there's nothing more demoralizing than taking one of those relatively scarce people and saying, your job in the Security Operations Center today is stare at this screen and look for an anomaly. It's a little bit like the Maytag repairman. Yes, there's going to be a bunch of them. Most of them are false alarms. That kind of rote activity is something where AI and machine learning can definitely help. Let the people do things that require human judgment. Jill talked about when do you put the human in the loop. Even for things like situational awareness and common operating picture, you need to recognize it comes in two flavors. There's one that's machine to machine. Brian lives in this world too. When I see a board of threat activity about something that's happening in cyber, that's a time machine. I'm looking backwards. It's a current connection, but if there's data flows, I've already lost that data. So I need machine-machine speed for response. I also need human speed response. A human needs to decide, I want to change my alert color. I want to change my alert posture. So you're trying to feed two kinds of audiences, and AI and ML definitely helps us say, our people can do the things that require people. We can automate the rest of this. And this capability has been getting good enough in the private sector that we can now give to government what are now fairly refined algorithms, and as much to the point is training data. We look at these hundreds of billions of pieces of data, and we've discovered, you know, there's 6 to 10 million that actually is a reasonably good training set to let us give you a lightweight algorithm that you can deploy in your environment, reporting into your Security Operations Center, because we recognize there are parts of government that aren't going to let even telemetry about threat activity go off premise, whether it's classified, whether it's just covered by other kinds of policies. So that's where the private sector can now say, look, we can help you both at the machine-to-machine response and informing people, the ability to look at a threat board and say, here's something happening, I need to talk to someone and coordinate a response.
Thanks, Jim. So
yeah, I think, if you don't mind, Rat, I think Jim's exactly spot on. And I think what feeds the conversation is some responsibilities on both sides. So I'll talk about the government, as a customer responsibility. You have to know your own processes and your decision-making paradigms. You have to have that playbook to know when your human has to be put in the loop, because context is everything. You could take a data stream and a threat and make one decision in a certain context that absolutely doesn't work in another. And let me be specific about that, right? Drawing in all the data of a possible DDoS attack on a networked capability that goes into a triage process, right? We can put artificial intelligence and machine learning on triage and reduce those false positive, false negative rates and put information in front of an analyst that is more meaningful than just having them stare at the screen. We can give them another layer and they can decide what to do next and take an action, right? But let's take that same data stream and flip it to a different type of networked capability. Say in the event of a next-gen 911 call center that's under attack from a telephony denial of service. AI and machine learning may be able to detect that that attack is coming based on, stream rates and inbound. But would we automate a response to that without humans on the loop? I'd say absolutely not. That's where life and safety kicks in, and the ethics rules we were talking about earlier really kick in, that you don't then shut off incoming traffic to a next-gen 911 call center, because there's going to be legitimate traffic affected by those kinds of decisions. So when you go to automate or leverage machine learning in your decision cycle, you really need to know where the human's going to come in and what the benefit and regret matrix is of automating that decision. And then for the vendor community, as they're bringing these robust technologies to the customers, be specific about the types of data that the customer is going to need to have access to, and the rate at which they're going to have access to it to get full value from the algorithms and the machine learning that you have so bespokely trained up on a data set, right? It could be that your customer doesn't have the routine access to the data they need to power that system, and it's not going to be a full value to them. And so having conversations about data access and how much and how often to really take full advantage of these systems, I think could knock down a lot of frustrations in the buyer-consumer conversations in these advanced areas.
Great, thanks, Brian. Daniela or Jill, anything to add before we move on? Okay, cool. Hey, I have a question from the outside. I wanted to say it was a call-in question, but it's actually a text message. What skills, and this tends to be more within your organization, what skills are you looking for in individuals that would like to join your organization? Open that up to anyone.
Well, at MIT, we are looking for excellence. We're looking for passion. We're looking for great background in computing, and really for people who want to invent the future.
Okay, thanks.
I'm going to broaden this because I don't know that I want to make it specific to AI and ML. I think there's this common misunderstanding that cybersecurity requires programmers. You actually need people with good human skills, people who work on a help desk, people who, even from a threat perspective, understand social engineering. So, some of the best people in cybersecurity are actually liberal arts backgrounds. Some of them even only have associate's degrees. So, breaking this idea, yes, we have this broad paradigm, the National Initiative on Cyber Education, nice, laid out all these different career paths, but the idea that you have to be technical and that you have to come from four-year things with credentials is something where we absolutely say it's having a creative approach to problem solving is actually more useful than any specific set of technical attributes or characteristics I can tell you to have.
I couldn't agree with Jim more, and I'll amplify it. Right here in America, we celebrate a diverse pool of workforce that come in, and that diversity of thought is an asymmetric advantage that our nation holds over some of our adversaries that don't celebrate some of those same values. And if we can harness that in the workforce that's applied to these problems, we stand a really good chance of winning, and quickly.
And I want to second everything that you guys said as well. The Department of Defense is huge. So we have a lot of talent. We need subject matter experts on cultures around the world. We need to have, of course, our soldiers and military personnel. But as far as the technical expertise for software development or even AI development itself, there's a huge range of expertise that you need. There are things you can do to adapt particular machine learning algorithms to try to tackle new problems. Needs less expertise than potentially what you might need if you're actually developing deep neural net architectures that are challenging new problems. So I'm going to second everything that people are saying is not just a broad background of people that we need, but also a broad swath of technical skills, and a willingness to serve the country and wanting to defend the country is what we're looking for.
Fantastic. Thank you all. I think we have time for one more question, and I wanted to get this in. And this one's primarily for you, Daniela, and then obviously anyone else could add into the end. I was amazed when I read your bio and the CSAL and all the technological innovations over the last 50 years that they've been involved with. So I want you to put your researcher's hat on and look into the future in the crystal ball. How do you see the global information infrastructure changing? I'd want to say 10 years, but that's probably too far out. Maybe within the next 2 to 5 years.
Well, first of all, I should say that right now we don't have the appropriate infrastructure to broadly take advantage of machine learning and AI technologies. And so this has to be improved. This has to be stepped up. Nobody has it. So we have to think about how to change our communication networks to communication data and computation networks. Machine learning relies on huge amounts of data, and many of the models that we are developing are very large. For instance, this summer, a new natural language understanding model was trained. The model is called GPT-3, and this model achieves very good performance. It's not a universal language model, but it's very close to the accuracy of what you might expect from a universal model. This model was trained on every text that is publicly available. It's huge. It's got billions of parameters, so running models like this, for whether it's for research or for business applications, running models like this requires much beefed up computation over what we have now. And so yes, I think that we have a real opportunity to think about what the computation infrastructure for the 21st century looks like. And this could put all of us in a leadership position to achieve something better than what we have now.
You're on mute, Ray.
I apologize, I was on mute. Jill, from a warfighter perspective, how does this infrastructure look?
Well, I was just going to add on to what Daniela said, because as more and more companies and governments and military sort of adopt these deep learning technologies that she was talking about, our demands are going to rise exponentially. This also means that the power demands for computing are also going to increase, which also impacts climate. So there is a need for us to invest a lot more into lower cost, lower power computing for deep learning and AI. In addition, more research into lowering the data requirements, as well as the computational costs of actually some of these deep learning algorithms. So I'm going to champion some of the research that Danielle wants, but also to talk about, as this infrastructure grows and more people want it, we have to seriously consider how do we make it more efficient.
Thank you for saying that, Jill. It's absolutely the right thing. We have to invest not just in infrastructure, but we also have to invest in the ideas. We really have to innovate, because otherwise we're going to plow the same field and the results will be increasingly more incremental.
That is absolutely true. And I want to thank you. There's a little voice in my ear that says our time is up. It's amazing how quickly time flies when you have a great conversation. I want to thank everyone on our panel and everyone out there that has joined us today. Please stay online for the next session, which is The Power of AI, being moderated by Amy. Thanks. Take care.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to introduce our guest keynotes for this closing out of the program. We have Joint AI Center Director, Lieutenant General Michael Groen, and Ili Bayraktari, Executive Director of the Congressionally Chartered National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. Welcome. AI is certainly an exciting area for the federal government, defense, and frankly, every other sector in society around the entire world. But if we don't collectively harness its potential, we do risk falling behind. This is the message our keynotes are going to talk about over the next half hour or so, specifically about NSC-AI's highly publicized final report released last week. It's what the Commission describes as an actionable winning strategy for the US to come out on top in this AI era, or what they also call this revolution. So to start us off, Illy, we'll go over to you. With the Commission's start 2 years ago, describe what really went into this report and give us some of its highlights from your perspective on how these recommendations can drive change from a national standpoint.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor and privilege to be on your show today, but also to share the stage with Lieutenant General Groen. He's a great friend, a great partner, and we would have not been able to produce our report after 2 years of hard work if it wasn't for General Groen's team and the JAIC. I believe General Groen leads one of the most groundbreaking offices in the Pentagon today, and so we're all rooting for him and his success. To answer your question, Congress about 2 years realized three things. AI is a really powerful tool for national security purposes. They realized that China has moved out, it is well organized and it's well resourced. And Congress understood that we don't have, it's like a top-down approach that is well resourced on our end. So they created our National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence that I had been privileged to lead the staff for the last 2 years. And the goal of this commission was really to provide the White House and the Congress with concrete recommendations about how can we accelerate adoption of AI for national security purposes. As I used to say to a number of audiences and a number of engagements that we had in the last 2 years, the purpose really is, the mandate was clear from Congress that we need to accelerate adoption, and we have to identify ways and means to maintain global advantage for artificial intelligence for national security purposes. Congress picked 15 commissioners. They're well-known individuals, technologists, academic leaders, and notable national security leaders to lead this commission. So as you mentioned, this past week on March 1st, we submitted our report to Congress and the White House. And the report in 759 pages really provide a concrete blueprint for the steps that our national security departments and agencies need to take for us to maintain advantage on this really important technology that could shape our economic, social, and ultimately, our security domain. So just to quickly talk about the final report, it's out there. You can download it on our website, www.nscai.gov. The report is divided into two big parts. The first part really is what the Armed Services Committee asked us to do, is to provide recommendations in how we defend America in the new AI era. And so we provide recommendations how our government can responsibly use AI technologies to protect the American people and ultimately our interests, but also it focuses on implications and applications of AI for defense and national security. The second portion of the report, the remaining 8 chapters, talk about how do we win the technology competition. So we recommend actions that our government needs to take to promote AI innovation, to improve national competitiveness and protect critical US advantages in the bigger strategic competition with China. So Amy, as you noted, the report is out. We have received a tremendous feedback so far. Now it is really up to the White House and the Congress to really take our recommendations and act, because as we noted, and General Groen highlighted in the speeches this week, we need to be AI ready by 2025.
Fantastic. General Groen, I know, the Defense Department has had an AI strategy of its own. We're basically looking at it right now with your leadership at the JAIC. The JAIC has been instrumental in creating things like the enterprise level solutions for AI across the department. So from your point of view, talk through how JAIC is really helping accelerate AI across the entire department. What importance does AI have for the overall national security mission?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I really appreciate the opportunity. Really, thanks for having me. And I want to say thanks to Illy as well. I mean, when he says they've spent 2 years on this, you have some highly credible, high-powered commissioners and a fantastic staff that have poured through every, all of evolving technology, all of the missions of defense, all of the geopolitical kind of constructs. I mean, it is all there. So I really highly commend the report to the listeners. And if you don't have time to read 759 pages, just like read the summary stuff. It's really good. There's several different versions of summaries that have some of the recommendations. And I think a lot of users will look at some of those summaries and think, wow, these are high level. Somebody in the government needs to do something. I would encourage you with every one of these things to just peel them apart and figure out, okay, how can you do something to make these things real, right? Because it's hard to articulate, even in a short report of 700 pages, like all of the fidelity of things that have to be considered as we try to improve the department's status in AI implementation. So to directly answer your question, so the JAIC is an implementation organization, right? So there are many think tanks in this town. The JAIC is a do tank, right? So our job is to take like all the work. You just had a great panel of research and development, research and engineering stalwarts from across the department and elsewhere across academia. Fantastic. Our job is to take that goodness, stuff that they develop and transition it into real capabilities inside the department. And so we work with academia, of course. We work with the research and development organizations. We work with companies, small innovative companies, everybody who's got good ideas in this space. And we try to bring that together and implement that across the Department of Defense. We are not a research and development organization. We have great relationships with those organizations, but our job is now to transition and actually to build capabilities inside the department. So that's what we do, right? So we accelerate the implementation, we accelerate the integration, and our kind of our mantra is really driving transformation. And no surprise to the audience here. When you work in the Pentagon or you work in some other secure facility, if you're in the IC or whatever. When you walk out to the parking lot every night, you turn your cell phone on and suddenly you join a connected enterprise that allows you to do almost anything. You can get advice about anything. You can get any services you want. You can buy things. I mean, you name it. I'm not telling anybody anything. But when you go inside the Department of Defense, you don't have that experience, right? And so, you have young soldiers, going out to the parking lot with their iPhones to get information about defense programs, for example. Like that's unacceptable, right? So I think there's a lot of drama, about artificial intelligence in the Department of Defense, et cetera. We're not talking about Terminators here. We're talking about making the department as efficient and effective as any corporate USA company is, right? And so for every taxpayer, I mean, the department is about 3 million people, including all the armed services, $700 billion a year. If there's one agency, one area in this nation that needs to be competitive in the AI space, it's the Department of Defense, right? For any number of reasons. I would just like to comment on, we're going to focus, or I'm going to focus at least on the defense aspects of the NSC AI report. But I would encourage everybody to look at the rest of it too. I mean, when you think about AI as what they forecast maybe a $16 trillion enterprise or market in by 2030, $16 trillion enterprise, right? For American competitiveness, it is absolutely essential that we compete, right? That's how our economy grows. That's how we continue to maintain, the prosperity and the continuity of our government and our way of life. I mean, it is real. It is about competing in the defense area with China and others, but it is just as much a story of American competitiveness that we have to protect and grow. So inside the JAIC, we're broadly, kind of our primary methods of operation here. Broadly enable is kind of our first mandate. So across all of the organizations, the services, the agencies of the department, our job is to kind of help them on their journey to AI. We don't necessarily build AI for them. We do in some cases. We don't necessarily fund, their transformation, although we help in some cases. What we do is build partnerships with these organizations and then help them achieve their objectives in the AI space. So we work hard. Our success is absolutely measured in the success of others. And so that's what we're after, is trying to spawn this broad transformation across the department, making lots of agencies, organizations, services really effective in the AI space. And I'll leave it there for we can pull that string if you like. Thanks.
Great. It definitely does span, you say it loud and clear, it does span, more than just DoD, but DoD is such a huge part of that, and we certainly recognize that. Illy, the Commission's report places a heavy emphasis on the global scale of AI, and obviously the General just touched on that a little bit. Why does taking action on these recommendations advance the nation on a global scale? Where are we right now in terms of the competition globally? Can you really put together for us what those opportunities look like?
So let me just quickly talk about where are we right now in terms of the competition. We spent a lot of time in the last 2 years really analyzing whatever the factors are out there you can analyze in open source in terms of where are we and our competitors regarding AI. Obviously, the United States and China are clearly the two world leaders in AI. And while we believe the United States is still the leader, this lead is rapidly eroding. So let me tell you how we did this. In assessing how we and the China compare, we compared like the 6 subcomponents of the AI stack. And let me just go quickly over all of them. Number 1 is hardware. Number 2 is data. 3, algorithm. 4, applications. 5, talent. 6 is the ability to integrate across all other 5 areas. We believe the United States has the greater capabilities in AI-related hardware, algorithms, and talent, but Beijing has advantages in data, obviously for reasons that we all know, applications, and lastly, integration capabilities. The Chinese are aggressively attempting to obtain leadership in all 6 portions of the AI stack, at which time they would have the overall leadership in the AI. So, as our report says, we must double down on our existing advantages and better compete with them in the areas in which we are currently behind. So let me just quickly go a little bit into a sub-detail for each of these components. In hardware, we lead in hardware, because we lead in the hardware because we are the world leader in chip design. However, it does not, we don't have the capability to manufacture cutting-edge hardware domestically, which is a key vulnerability for us. The Chinese are spending aggressively to become a leader in chip production by 2030. And if you see the latest articles in Wall Street Journal and today New York Times, they're even putting more money and efforts to accelerate this. So we need to reshore cutting-edge semiconductor fabrication capabilities to ensure we continue our advantage in this space. In terms of data, China has systemic advantages collecting and pooling data due to their political system. So it will be really difficult for our country to contest China in this area alone. But we need to work with our allies and partners to better share and pool data so we can compete more effectively in this space with China. Algorithms, United States has a slim lead in research on AI algorithms. China is rapidly closing this gap and could overtake the United States within 5 to 10 years. It is our assessment. This area will also not be a sole source of systemic advantage for us, given how many algorithms are open source that you can develop. So we need to double annual federal AI R&D spending every year from now until 2026, so we reach the point of $32 billion by 2026. Applications, as I mentioned, China has a slim lead over us in AI application, as it has proven capable of deploying AI at scale, and it is far ahead in certain applications, such as smart cities and facial recognition. We also need to make DoD AI ready by 2025, as I mentioned, and establish regional AI innovation clusters to diversify our commercial ecosystem. In terms of talent, United States has a slim lead in AI talent because our firms and universities still attract the top researchers. China is putting a lot of resources on AI talent. It's aggressively courting top talent from around the world. The fact that many top researchers in the United States are foreign and do not have a path to citizenship could cause this advantage to diminish in the near future. We need to pass STEM immigration reform to keep these key talent in the United States. And lastly, integration. China leads in its ability to integrate across the AI stack. as it has a clear path to utilize and advance its AI capabilities, and is supporting, and it has a tremendous support backed by resources. No such organizing body or strategy exists in our country. So as we recommend, we need to establish a Technology Competitiveness Council at the White House to coordinate decisions and develop a national technology strategy to ensure our efforts across the AI stack are mutually reinforcing.
That's a great look at some of the milestones that are up and coming over the next decade, and certainly very aggressive milestones. I mean, we hear the urgency in some of these things and why it matters so much. General Groen, DoD is in the midst of vast transformation, largely that's spearheaded by Jake. What does that transformation look like, and how would the recommendations outlined in the report kind of help the department in that journey?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great question, Amy. I mean, it's complex, right? And so there are 1,000 flowers blooming across the department, and that's really good news, right? And some services are way out in front. Some services are doing really well. Some services are still, in the early phases. Of the 20 agencies, that are part of the department. I'm talking about things like the Defense Health Agency, the Defense Logistics Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, et cetera. Some of them have good and growing mature AI efforts. So it's really, it is not like we're starting from zero, right? So we've got a large number, what I say, flowers blooming, and that's really good. It's too early for us to start culling the herd, which is kind of the natural process in the Pentagon, right? If there are more than one, you quickly focus on which ones are the weakest, and you cut them so that you can feed the strongest one. We're not at that point yet, right? We need more flowers blooming across the department. What's lacking though is now this idea of how do you coalesce all of these small AI developments into cohesive enterprises, into warfighting enterprises, into logistics enterprises. All of the capabilities that have to evolve from small beginnings. There are a large number of development platforms, for example. So people are tinkering with machine learning and trying to train algorithms and that sort of thing kind of across the board. But like an integrated warfighting AI-driven enterprise, that still eludes us, right? We are not at that point yet. So a lot of these recommendations kind of, we're in early stages, and you can kind of see the challenge out there, but we have a lot of work to do to get to the point where we can address some of these recommendations, because we have to build the right foundations. And this is this has been and is a challenge. The Pentagon is designed to do things in stovepipes, right? I mean, it's the nature of the Pentagon, but it's also, I think, purposefully built that way in the early days. So now where, our historic approach was the large program approach, right? Where the Department of Defense built a requirement, paid for the research and development of new technology, new capability. Some of that trickled out into the commercial space, but it was delivered back to the Pentagon as a large program. That doesn't work for AI, right? So AI, you need a software engineering model, a software engineering approach where you have to take good ideas from a mature commercial technology environment that has mature AI and bring that into the department. And it's kind of working the machine backwards. And from a cultural perspective, the machine doesn't run backwards very well, right? So the machine kind of has to be retrained to take technology in from external sources and turn that into capabilities, not by the delivery of a large piece of kit, but through taking that technology and doing iterative development into those warfighting enterprises or those logistics enterprises or those intelligence enterprises that really start to make a difference for AI application across the department. And I'll just make one key point here. When I say like logistics enterprises, intelligence enterprises, fires enterprises, maneuver enterprises, command and control enterprises, the common factor here is it's not just about the tech. It's about functional experts, and it's about functional experts owning the challenge of integrating AI into their systems and into their functions. I heard one of your earlier speakers talk about, you have to understand process. Exactly. Process is everything, right? So as we talk about implementation, what we need is process owners, leaders inside the Department of Defense, and I hope I'm talking to a bunch of them now, leaders in the Department of Defense who have to take on this challenge. What is your process? How could AI drive your process better? Could you make better data-driven decisions? If you can start answering yes to those things and understand kind of where you are in the journey, then pick up the phone and call 1-800-JAKE, right? Or send us a text or go on ai.mil and get in contact with us, because what we would like to do is help you on that journey, right? And again, we deal with customers who are, very advanced and folks who are just starting on the journey, right? And so we want to drive broad transformation. It is the responsibility of process owners and leaders in the department to make this transformation happen. And if you're one of those people and your organization has not thought about the integration of AI yet in your business processes, in your functional processes, then you're behind, right? You need to catch up with the rest of the department. So I challenge you and ask you, if you're a CIO or a CDO or a process owner, please, let's get on the train to help the department become a modern, efficient, and effective enterprise. Thanks.
Fantastic. That's a great look into those partnership opportunities too, with all facets of the industry. So I'm glad you highlighted that. This question's a little bit for both of you. Is there anything noteworthy or something particularly worth discussing with us that you learned about AI, Illy, over the course of this project's past 2 years and your involvement in it, and of course your extensive background at the department and General Groen over your past 6 months at JAKE?
Well, Amy, the one thing that was I come from a government background, so I didn't have extensive AI background. So we had to rely for the last 2 years really to in engaging and discussing and really reaching out to people that have AI expertise, people that have developed AI for the last couple of years, even decades. But the really one thing that surprised me in the last 2 years was, anytime you work in a policy issue in Washington, there are equities, there are bureaucratic infighting. But maybe for the first time in my career, I was surprised by the willingness and hope among many government officials, private sector representatives, academic leaders to help us get our mission right. It was fascinating that everybody understood, I think, that what we need to do right now as a country is to get AI right, because AI really represents an important opportunity to advance our economic and social well-being. But ultimately, this will have a security component associated with that we want our country to have, or our warfighters that General Groen here represents, really the best tools for the next generation of competitions we're about to enter or we have entered. So with that, Amy, I was really surprised by the willingness and hope of many actors to help us in the last 2 years to really come to this product we submitted to Congress and the White House.
General?
Yeah, great. So building off Illy's comments, I think so. One of the things that was I guess expected, but it's kind of shocking to see, the stovepipe nature of developments within the department, right? Because now when you start talking about things like JADC2, for example, which is kind of the headliner construct for this, netted architecture with any sensor feeding any decision maker, et cetera, that's all really exciting. You can't do that without an enterprise of capability, right? You can't do that with an operationally oriented platform or set of platforms, a fabric of platforms. And so, it's really important for us. I guess when I came into this job, I was thinking small. I was thinking about, oh yeah, here's a machine learning algorithm. Here's how we train it. Here's how we do this little task over here. Those things are really important. They remain really important. But what really kind of like stares you in the face is, yeah, that's cute. How are you actually going to fight with that, right? How are you actually going to link Air Force capabilities and space capabilities and Marine Corps capabilities together to create, real capabilities? One of the things we say is, hey, we turn technology into capability. We do that by taking technology to the process experts, the mission owners, the functional experts. If you have a team that can speak tech, can speak warfighting, can speak government and how government makes decisions and how things are resourced, okay, now you have a powerhouse team. It's not just tech, right? Tech is just a small piece of it. It is committed leaders who understand their processes and say, wow, you know what, we could do these processes a lot better. That again, not a surprise per se, but the scale of the Department of Defense and how many of those leaders need to kind of pop their heads up and go, holy cow, I'm missing the train here. I need to get working in my space. That's intimidating, right, from the outside. So transformation is a big deal. So is the Department of Defense.
Yeah. So Illy, this final report, I mean, we've talked about it just a little bit already. It faces Congress and the White House for action. So we understand that, and we've discussed the gravity of what that means. We'll all be seeing how that plays out in the near term. In an earlier panel, we've already learned of similar moves, such as the DoD's adoption of DIV's AI ethics principles, which was over a year now. It seems like yesterday. But now that the report is done, what is the Commission's role now, and what do those next steps look like with collaborations with Jake? And the work is far from over.
Thanks, Amy. No, you're absolutely right. So as we have submitted our final report last week, that doesn't mean the end of this commission. HASC and SASC really were smart enough that they built an extra 6 months in our tenure, because they thought that for the next 6 months, we should be able to socialize and provide any kind of a help to Congress and the White House in terms of understanding, the background of these recommendations, why we ended up recommending these actions for federal government to take now in order to accelerate adoption of AI. So from March until October, where we end, we will spend an enormous time socializing our recommendations. We have already met with the Secretary of Defense last week. General Groen was in that meeting as well. So I'm hoping General Groen will take the baton inside the department to really focus on the implementation mechanism. And Jake is probably the best suited in terms of trying to understand what are some of the recommendations that we can do now, some of them that are more midterm and some of them that are more long-term. And I think under General Groen's leadership, we can really see some kind of a big movement inside the department, as I said, to be AI ready by 2025. Congress, we have a big hearing tomorrow with a HASC where our commissions are testifying. We have had enormous partnership with Congress so far. In FY21, there are already 19 recommendations we submitted last March. And so we will spend the next couple of months really working with the Armed Services Committee to see how many of these recommendations will make it in the next NDAA. Some of our recommendations really are beyond just the Armed Services Committee, because we have some really big ideas in terms of talent, especially in creating the United States Digital Service Academy that is beyond just a Armed Services Committee responsibility. And so, as I said, we're here to help. We have about 6 months now, as I mentioned, to socialize and really see, the execution of some of the, low-hanging fruit recommendations. For some of the big moves, we hope that the White House and Congress take real ownership and drive it from a top-down perspective. And General Groen has been a tremendous partner here, so we will continue working with him and his staff in the coming days and months.
Fantastic. General, just to piggyback off that a little bit, do you have any sort of idea of what's more high priority in the near term versus what's can be pushed out more?
Yeah, we've got a pretty good sense. Thank you, Illy, for the to-do list. We really appreciate that. But honestly, it's fantastic work. The good news is, we're in execution. We're on a parallel path. I mean, we're actually working on a lot of these already. Maybe not to the scope and scale that the NSCI AI report articulates, but that's okay, because we'll grow into that space, right? So I think the department is kind of really waking up to this. I mean, you can almost feel the grass grow under your feet here of AI just kind of springing up all over the place. So that's really good. But I think one of the challenges again is going to be integrating all of these stovepipe efforts into an integrated enterprise, right? We've got to be able to work together. We have to have seamless interaction. And that means seamless interaction, like our approach to network, authorization and, being able to operate on a network. I mean, we still have to this day, defense customers, who have to take Navy data, put it on a hard drive, fly it to an Air Force base so they can get on an Air Force network to transmit to another Air Force place so they can push it to a different element, in the combined or in the joint force. Like, okay, that's unacceptable, right? Where we're moving data on hard drives because we won't allow each other access to our networks across the department. So there's some real foundational, digital modernization work that has to occur to make this possible. Our cloud strategies have to mature. Our integration of modern software engineering has to occur. This idea of network sharing and our network topology, and we have, rightly so, kind of contracted in a defensive crouch here, with all of the attacks on our networks, and that's been necessary. But we have to figure out ways to still get the job done, right? How do we cross credential? How do we, and then if we can do that, then that creates all kinds of opportunities for sharing algorithms. For example, if the Navy has an inventory algorithm, the Army should be able to benefit from that inventory algorithm, or the Marine Corps, or any other type of algorithm. We've done a lot of work in preventive maintenance, for example, for aviation platforms. Those algorithms look strikingly similar, right? So if you train them with new data, it's actually the same algorithm, right? So we need to be able to share those algorithms. We need to be able to share training data. And then critically, we need to secure all of this, right? So we have to have the ability to share, the ability to cross networks, the ability to work from clouds or data centers, with our own compute capacity. But we need to be able to secure the whole business. And this is kind of one of our primary challenges. It's just like this big shadow, like over everything that we do. Like, are you vulnerable here? Are you vulnerable here? Are you vulnerable here? And the answer right now is yes. And we've got to figure out how to close those loops.
That's a fantastic point. Illy, would you like to add on to that?
No, I'd just like to say that General Groen doesn't have an easy task ahead of him. Anytime you introduce these kind of offices that are seen as a disruptors by the bigger DoD community, you always have antibodies. But I think we all agree that this is such a powerful technology that the Department of Defense will benefit really by adopting as quickly as possible, and by building the digital backbone required for this kind of technology. And I think General Groen really, as a commission, we early on understood the importance of JAIC. And then so we recommended elevation of JAIC to be a direct report to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. And under General Groen's leadership, now he's taken that role and responsibility, I believe, because the FY21 really took that recommendation that we provided to Congress and elevated JAIC. And I think that is the rightful position for JAIC until it matures to the point that, AI is in everybody's background, that we're not talking anymore about AI. When I say AI ready by 2025, all the issues we discussed today, from people to the digital infrastructure to the backbone that DoD needs, I hope that we have it in place, that we don't have the same conversation again in 2025. And so I think the department should really be behind the JAIC's effort, and General Groen's leading this effort is critical for us to really make this leap forward.
General, do you see any issues or challenges ahead in as this AI ecosystem gets built up and established and grows? What are the challenges with holding these services accountable? I mean, you've detailed the data sharing issues, and as recommendations theoretically will get adopted, how do you see that challenge playing out?
Again, it's a question of scale, and this is why we're approaching the challenge like we are, right? So it is a huge to-do list. It's a hard to-do list, but it's not the JAIC's to-do list, right? It's the department's to-do list, and everybody who owns one of these processes, everybody who owns a function, has the obligation now to okay, let's turn this into something real, and let's start stitching it together. this is why our approach and the idea, I think Illy mentioned a kind of a cultural ramification, which is true, right? So an organization, that comes in, and says, hey, we're going to help you do these things. The natural antibody is, okay, well, wait a second, I'm already doing these things. The last thing I want is somebody to look over my shoulder. This is why our entire approach is enabling, right? Like, we want to make other people successful, right? So we're not the Jakes, not driving this. What we're driving is a relationship with folks. So we understand, hey, where are you on your journey? Do you need help doing a data readiness assessment? Do you need help with an AI algorithm development? Do you need access to data somewhere that we may be able to help you with? Do you just need access to a contract, right? Yes, we have a contract. Do you need market intelligence for companies that may have expertise in exactly your problem area? The Jake exists to connect those dots, right, across the department to enable customers broadly. And we're hoping, the wind that we provide, you will move out all these boats forward, right? And as their sales catch it. And so that's I think how you get to transformation. So that's kind of like the bottom up approach. From the top down, it is going to be important, though. At some point, we do have to issue directives and authorities, from the department level to say, okay, no, actually, we are going to build this warfighting enterprise, and here's how you plug in. So some of those technical process platform details are going to have to be driven by department leadership, but I think department leadership is very ready to do that, right? They want the goodness that comes from a cohesive enterprise. So we're trying to help build as many partners in that space as we can, so that we can do warfighting, right? So that we can do things like JADC2, so that we can create enormous efficiencies in the department, right? Just through enhancing our business processes. So there's AI applications every corner in this 5-sided building here. And so, you just walk down the hall and you can see them, right? Like, oh, you know what? We could AI this, we could AI that. I'll give you a quick example. So we got a task to do an inventory of all the AI efforts across the Department of Defense in this appropriations bill for 21. And we were thrilled with that task. Do you know why? Because in a normal environment, okay, the data calls would go out. We would send emails. We would be calling people. We would try to ask people, hey, is there any AI under that desk over there? Instead, we wrote an AI that went through all the data that the department already has on resource expenditures, on AI development, on platform development, and we were able to use an AI to compile all of that data, not just once, but anytime we want it, right? And to me, that's just such a powerful example of, okay, if you take a different approach to your process, an AI, data-driven approach to your process, whatever your process is, imagine how much better it could be. That's a tiny little example. We want to set a good example, but to me, that was just like, it's just powerful because it just right in your face, like, oh, no kidding. Let's use AI to measure AI, right? And it's that kind of thinking, stepping away from how you do business today and thinking about how you should be doing business. And if we get our process owners to do that, I think the implementation of all of these recommendations kind of flows naturally from that, because people are going to want to have trained workforces. They're going to want to have secure platforms. They're going to want to have ethical foundations that that really result in trusted AI and trusted AI ecosystems. So that's exactly what we're trying to pull together across the department. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Amy.
Well, thank you. We are just running out of time, but this was a fantastic look at some of the exciting opportunities ahead for AI and the work that Jake is working on. And of course, Illy, all the efforts that you've put into this report. And I'm excited to see what's coming up ahead. And I thank you both so much for sharing your perspectives.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you, Illy.
I'll now hand it back to Mike Hoffman to close out our program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you to all of our speakers this morning and afternoon who joined us. Fantastic coverage of a topic that touches so many government agencies, so many industries out there, and it seems like we're just at the tip of the iceberg with the potential of what this technology can accomplish over a vast array of different areas. So thank you again to all of our speakers. And I also want to thank our sponsor for today's event, Fortinet. Thank you so much for helping us put on the content that you have for everybody, for the entire audience. So for next week, we have another exciting event for everyone. It's going to be on March 18th, and it's going to be focused on the way the Department of Veterans Affairs has tackled COVID, whether it be the testing as well as the distribution of vaccines and the different technologies that have been stood up to make sure that veterans are aware of the different opportunities, whether it be the vaccines or the testing, and making sure that it's done equitably. So be sure to sign up for that. It's going to be at 8:30 in the morning. It's an early start because we're going to have both Chairman Takano from the Senate VA Committee, or the House VA Committee, and Senator Tester, the Chairman of the Senate VA Committee as well, join us at 8:30. So be sure to start a little bit earlier with us to join us and discuss that. So we're excited about that. And there's also another event on March 31st focused on infrastructure. So we have a great lineup throughout the rest of the year. So please check that out, as well as the different podcasts that we'll be releasing, continuing on GovCast, Cybercast, and the like. So thanks everybody for joining us, and look forward to seeing you again soon.